All right. According to this, we're live anyway. I don't know if that's actually true or if it's a myth. I got the link pinned up on my channel. I've got a link up on Jacob's channel. We're going to talk for 20 minutes. Oops, there we go. All right. We're going to talk for like 20 minutes and then we're going to invite people in to come and play and talk about consideration and when it can be inconsiderate, right? So this has come up a lot lately where, well, have you considered this and have you considered that? And yeah, there's an infinite number of things you can consider, but this goes back to, should you? Are they important? Are they interesting to the topic at hand? Because you can just, consideration is infinite, technically speaking. Like, at what point do you not bring something in for consideration, right? Which is, not to say never, but a lot of times it's a trick that we play on ourselves. And this problem we just witnessed on the Discord server, right? Where people they want to say something, but they don't want conflict. So they couch it in this, well, have you considered, right? And then they're projecting all over the place. Like, well, no, I didn't consider that because it wasn't part of what I was talking about. Right? And sometimes you need to say that to people, like, look, have you considered that if you have a beer, right, that maybe, that's one beer too many already? Well, for some people, that's a concern. It's not a concern for a bunch of people, but for some people, that's a concern, right? Or have you considered that maybe if you start taking these painkillers that you won't be able to stop? That's a concern. Right? And if somebody asks you, should I take painkillers? It's perfectly reasonable to bring that up. But if you say something like, well, I'm worried about the impact this will have on the global economy. And it's like, well, yeah, but really, I just wanted to go to the store. That's not a valid consideration. Like, the impact you have on the global economy in the frame of I want to go to the store is, kind of pushing it. And then the question is, well, why are you doing that? Are you trying to guilt them into not going to the store? Probably you are, right? And do you know that, or are you just doing that and not even realizing what your own unconscious motivations are? And I have a video on unconscious versus conscious motivations on navigating patterns, because of course I have a video. And I think that's the problem. Is that it's easy to get carried away with consideration and use it as a way to project something that you're otherwise avoiding talking about, or to use it as a tool of manipulation to force people to do or not do a certain thing. And it's very pernicious because it's one of these deceptions that we use on ourselves. And it's our unconscious mind deceiving us into believing that we're being helpful or good, or we're just trying to make sure that your poor tiny brain, which only had two options, now has to deal with a bunch of more considerations that aren't relevant or may not be relevant, or are relevant but are unimportant. Because a lot of times there are decisions that the fact that they have consequences isn't relevant because you have to do them anyway. Like, a decision's going to be made. There are going to be consequences one way or the other. Considering all of those consequences doesn't help you make the decision, right? It can paralyze you into no decision. And that's really important to realize. So sometimes you're using it as warfare. It's a weapon. And anything can be weaponized. Like, empathy can be weaponized. Compassion can be weaponized. Love can be weaponized. Consideration can be weaponized. All of these things can be weaponized. And that's because the weaponization of something is in the framing and the intent and not in the thing itself. And thinking it's in the thing itself is a materialist mistake, right? And that's a problem.
Yeah, and to be fair to people, right? Like, we can weaponize these things to ourselves, right? So in some sense, this idea of analysis paralysis, which is, I think, a really modern problem where a lot of people have to deal with. Like, it's us over and over talking to ourselves, have you considered this? Have you considered this? Right? Like, and it's not in that way, but it's like, oh, I should think about this. Oh, you should think about this, right? So there's this adding of complexity to that goes beyond relevance, right? So in a sense, consideration is in some sense extending what is relevant, right? Like what is the realm that we have to deal with, and that is sometimes a good thing, right? Because like Vervaeke talks about this reciprocally narrowing, where you're focused on, oh, I always get this theory, right? Like, yeah, maybe that was the right decision like 15 years ago, but after 15 years, there might be a different brand that is way cheaper or whatever value that you want to ascribe, way healthier, that you want to get the brand from, right? And so getting stuck in this understanding of, well, I don't want to consider anything else because that's too much for me, right? Like there's a negative in that aspect of the equation, but there's also a negative in the aspect of, well, like now I'm going to have to consider the 150 brands or types of whatever cereal that are available, and then, well, I could also eat bread. So, and then I need to put something on the bread, and then I could also do this, right? And it's endless, right? Like so we need to limit that consideration, right? And the frame in which this was brought up to us initially was, we when we ask questions, often we need to make a decision to go forward, right? And so we ask someone's decision, suggestion for assisting us with that decision making, right? So I have reduced my complexity to 2 choices, and now I need you to say whether this one is better for me or this one is better for me, so I can move forward in the world. And at that point, the last thing that a person wants to hear is, have you considered, because they have considered all the options already, right? And in modern times, people have considered all the options, and getting outside of that frame is not respectful of the care that they put into their own decision making, right? And then it's okay to give a suggestion later on, right? If that's appropriate to that person, and like, well, you to me this is important, right? Like maybe you should consider that as well, or whatever, right? But that is after you give them the resolution to the problem, right? And if you're not giving them the solution to the problem, what you're doing is you're inserting your priority over the priority of the individual that you're talking with. And I think that's the problem that we kind of want to dance around today.
Right. That and the equivocation on the word considerate. Right. So we're using it in 2 ways. I mean, I think everybody is, like, to be fair, right? It's not a particular specific problem, right? But a consideration is an object in the world, right? Or an object of thought, right? Like, oh, we're going to think about these decisions or these thoughts or these emotions or these feelings or whatever, right? Or this situation, whatever it is. Okay. Being considerate towards someone is a different operation entirely. And so giving people considerations, in other words, more choices, more things to think about, is not necessarily respectful of their cognitive load, their cognitive capacity, right? Or the framing that they're trying to keep intact. It's perfectly valid to say, well, I don't understand your choices. Can you explain to me how you got there, right? But then you're not pretending to give them an answer that they didn't ask for example, which is really, that's considerate, right? Asking somebody, hey, are you sure it's just between those 2 things? Like, have you thought about, just asking somebody, have you thought about this? Sure. And maybe they haven't, and maybe that's useful. But answering them with, well, really, you should consider the global impact of your decision to go to Walmart. No, no, I just asked you, should I go to Walmart? Like, it's not that hard. right? And so to be considerate towards the person is to help to answer their initial question. If you want to reframe it later, to Manuel's point, reframe it later. But first, cooperate with them. Like, and this considerations thing is just a way of rebelling. It's another way of rebelling. And it's a big problem. Like, people are running into this left, right, and center, especially lately. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it's just leftover anxiety and stress from the fake news virus scam garbage. And we're just suffering from that left, right, and center. Like, people are on edge and they're anxious and they're rebelling against everything, because who knows what you should rebel against and what you shouldn't. Like, I'm right there with you. Like, that's difficult, right? We've been thrown into a world of too many choices. And now we're just seeing choices everywhere. And we're like, well, I'm going to put everybody in the same distress I'm in by giving them more choices than they need to have. Right? And look, I mean, sometimes people need more choices. Are you sure you know when, though? Are you really sure that you know what's in their mind well enough to know that they need all these extra choices? Really?
Yeah. And so that's one part. And it's like, if when you're giving someone a consideration, do you know where you're coming from, right? Like, what are you trying to achieve when you're giving this consideration, right? Because when you're giving a consideration, right, there's well, you take someone out of a binary decision, right, which is fine theoretically, right? But the dimension that you're adding, right, like, is coloring the decision, right? Like, it's changing the variables into a way, and there's a likelihood that there's a personal motive in the way that you're changing the variables, right? Like, so what you're doing in some sense is you're trying to get the other to express something that you want, or that you think is right. And that might be the right thing to do, but is it the right thing? I mean, the thing that you want to express might be right, but is it the right thing to do to use the other person to get that manifested in the world? And I would argue no, right? Like, people have a hard time making decisions, right? Like, so when you're making someone's frame bigger, what you're implicitly saying is, well, I don't think you're capable of making this decision correctly. But then, how are they supposed to know how to evaluate the new framing and make the decision correctly in the new frame? Because, like, if you already judge them incapable of doing that, how can you get them to participate in the other framing correctly?
Yeah. And that is the problem of respecting boundaries and decision making. And, look, I mean, I've got a video on binary thinking, and you don't want to get stuck in binary thinking. And I say clearly in the video, you also often need to use a binary to make a decision. Like, that is required. So I'm not saying you can't ever use a binary, right? But getting stuck in binary thinking is different. It's like, dualism is a good example. And people do this all the time, right? They say, well, I'm not a dualist, but between these two things, it's like, well, then you're a dualist. Like, you pick two things. It's not hard. And so people project this stuff out. They're projecting their intents and their reasonings and their colorings of the world out onto others with this consideration thing. And I don't think it's a valid way to interact with people. Like, I don't feel it's at all, something that you should be doing. I mean, I think it's a projection of your own internal anger, resentment, insecurity, whatever. And there's a lot of that projection. There's a lot of that insecurity projection going on. And I don't know why people are so, are so stuck on that. But they seem to be stuck on it. Like, why do you care about other people and what they're doing in the world such that you want to impose your considerations on them, right? Because your considerations are yours. The things that you find important in life are are things that you personally find important in life, and that's fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's part of the issue, is that people are not respecting the boundaries of where they end and other people begin. And that's really important. You can't just take everything that's important to you and cast it onto every other person that you find. That's not appropriate. Like, there are boundaries in the world for a reason, and there are interactions in the world that are important to maintain. And you can't just mix up what's in your head with what should be in other people's heads. And that just destroys their focus, and it doesn't allow them to do things in the world. It forces them into a situation where they can't interact correctly. So that's part of this consideration. If it's projection, not all of it is, but a lot of it seems to be, then there's a problem. Like, if the issue is that you need to buy something at the store, the global consideration of whether or not you should buy it at Walmart is not valid. You've already decided to buy things. Like, if you're not buying things, then the global consideration might be more important. But you've already narrowed down the possibilities. Like, why are people dragging in other things?
Yeah, I think we also have to consider the agency of the other person, right? So if your judgment truly is this person has not considered this option, then what you want to do is you want to give that person the capacity to realize a way into the perspective that they're missing. And so you want to grant them the insight and the capability to resolve this issue for themselves. And when you're just handing them the frame, right, like, oh, this is the solution that you should think of, you're shortcutting that process. You're not letting them step through the considerations themselves, but you're handing them, right? Because one of the issues that I have with people in modern times is they don't justify their positions very well, right? Because they don't have means to get to a proper justification of their position. And so what that means is that we haven't cultivated that skill, right? Like, and what we want to do, right, like, if we want to truly help the individual, is help them cultivate the skill of getting into a certain insight, right? So if you think the consideration of the impact on the global economy when going to Walmart or whatever is important, then get to the point that the person can make that important to themselves, right? In a relevant way, instead of implying that this is important and letting them participate in this game that you're effectively playing.
Forcing them to participate. And I did want to address this. CW Weeks, what do you guys think of Andrew Basden's paradigm for research as a rule of thumb for such interaction, right? And this is listen, affirm, critique, enrich. Look, I mean, if you need procedures to tell you to participate in the world, I mean, then you need procedures to tell you to participate in the world. That's great. That's not the optimal state, right? The optimal state is not to need the procedures, but to be able to engage poetically with everything instead. And then you can drop the procedures. And procedures are helpful because they do provide that stepping stone. So that's not a no procedure statement. It's a yes, but also. And I don't think most people should need that. Like, most people should learn to listen first. And I don't know how you affirm things. I really don't. Most people don't seem to bother. I don't think critique is valid. I think acceptance is more important. Feedback might be a better word. Enrich, yeah, if you can. Like, a lot of this stuff is assuming that people can do things that probably they actually can't do. There is a lot of people who cannot have a valid critique of something. A lot of people. So, for example, you can go and say, well, the reason why Elon Musk put a poll about letting Trump back on Twitter was, okay, let me explain something to you, son. You don't know. You ain't got no idea. In fact, you probably don't know all the possible reasons. You've probably reduced this problem to, I know why Elon Musk put that poll up about Trump on Twitter. No, you don't. First of all, if you think it's a one reason, you're an idiot. Sorry, you just are. There's lots of good reasons to do that. One of them is free press, which, to some extent is a genius move for a company you just paid $44 billion for with very little hope of recouping most of that money. Another reason is engagement on the platform as such, because that increases the value of the platform irrespective of the free press. That's two reasons. Another reason is to gauge the zeitgeist of the people on the platform, right? And because you're getting the free press from the news, you're also gauging the zeitgeist of the people who aren't on the platform at the same time. That's four reasons. I don't think I have all the reasons. Okay. If you reduced it to one, you're wrong. Almost no decisions that people make, especially people, highly successful people like Elon Musk make, are about one thing, because that's inefficient and suboptimal and antithetical to progress. In order to progress, you got to wrap things up so that you can move forward rapidly. This whole I'm going to make $1 by working an hour thing won't get you very far. Not that you shouldn't do it, right? But it's not going to get you Elon Musk wealthy. That's for sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody should be Elon Musk wealthy. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm poor and living in the woods myself, literally. So whatever, right? It's not a big deal. But to criticize somebody, that successful on something you just don't have the expertise to criticize them on is absurd, right? And Chris Kavanaugh did this, and I actually, kind of told him yeah, he's trolling you because basically you're not smart enough to understand what's going on, and that's true. Sorry, he's just not smart enough, and that's the problem. Is that we often think we can criticize, we often think we can understand what other people are saying, we often think we can affirm it, right? And often people are inarticulate and they can't restate what I just said. Oh, fair enough. I don't hold it against them. That's normal. It's okay. I'm not upset when people can't do that. I'm upset when they clearly don't get the point, but and whatever. That's my flaw. But it is sort of important to make those distinctions.
Yeah, and I think when we're taking some lists like that, right? Like listen, affirm, critique, and rich, right? It's important to realize that those are options, right? And have some sense of what it means to do these things, right? So I'm allergic to having a procedure be a response, right? Because getting into a procedure as well is in some sense condescending. It's breaking the flow of the conversation. It's adding. Well, it might add unnecessary distraction, right? There's, like Mark said, right? These things are not easy to critique, but also to affirm, right? When I say something, you better damn well know what I'm saying before you affirm me, because if you affirm the wrong thing, I'll get upset, because now you're implying that you understood me and you didn't. What's going on there, right? So these things have their inherent danger, right? And I think the best answer is humility. When we're humble, right? When someone asks us for an opinion between A and B, right? We can either say I can't answer the question for whatever reason, or you say A or B because you think A or B is good, and you should have A or B with a reason for A or B, right? You shouldn't just say A or B because you want to give an answer, right? Like you should have a justified reason for that answer. Else you say, like, I can't make a justified decision between these two, right? Like I just don't know how to pick. And so when we're talking from humility, right? Like we're talking from a place of not knowing, right? Like not certainty. And I think when we're talking about techniques or whatever, like that, they should promote the not knowingness, right? Like, so the listening is in some sense, it's implicit in that if you listen, then you know, and therefore you can do these other things, right? But yeah, like, and sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Like sometimes a person just doesn't want to make the decision. They just don't want to. They don't want to do it, and what they're actually asking for is not for you to find A or B better, but to help them out of their stuckness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it really is about imposing values on others more often than not. Not all the time, but fairly often. And it's a big issue. Like, are you sure that by saying what you're saying, you aren't just imposing your values on other people unnecessarily? Because maybe that's the issue. Like maybe there's something inside of you that's putting you in a situation that's unhelpful, right, to the other person. So you're trying to be considerate of them, but in fact, you're just doing something that's projecting into them. And are we really always aware that we're not actually rational most of the time? Like and the problem is that signals out there everywhere. Oh, people are rational. No, they're not. That's just wrong. There's no experimental evidence that says anything other than we're almost never rational about anything ever. It's actually what the scientific experiments say. And you can, replication crisis in science gets it. Okay, but you don't have any evidence that people are rational most of the time when they're making their decisions. And you don't have any evidence that they can be, because if you look on an fMRI, for example, or using some other scanning method, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do the things that we tend to classify as rational. Most of the time, we're working on automatic pilot, baby, and we don't know what we're projecting. We have no idea, because we're not really paying attention that much to what the results of what we're saying actually are and how we feel about them. And often, we don't appreciate, that people aren't obligated, right? So it was funny, BOM a few months ago, somebody came in and they said, "Oh, explain to me the meaning crisis." And so, I gave my quick explanation, and then somebody else gave a very similar, explanation using completely different framing and words, which is great, wonderful. And he said, "Well, I don't understand." And it was like, okay, but I'm not obligated to explain something in a way that you can understand. Like there's no law that says that I have to answer your question. There's no law that says I have to answer a question in the way that you can understand it. And there's no law that says I have to keep trying to answer your question until you understand it. I may be incapable of doing that. You may be incapable of understanding me. There's no obligation there. And that's where, people get a lot wrapped up in that. Oh, you need to do this because of this, or you need to do that because of that. Really? Are you sure? And when you're saying because of this and because of that, is that your real motivation? Right? Or are you projecting that on other people? Like, if something's not important to me, then you saying you have to do this because of this is not valid. That's not important to me. Like, I don't have to worry about the state of the global supply chain because I'm going to Walmart. I don't have to do that. It's not important to me. What's important to me is what I need to get at Walmart, and whether or not I should shop at Walmart or Target or something, whatever arbitrary set of decisions you want to make. And the relevancy is important. It's the most important thing. I mean, John Vervaeke talks about it all the time for a reason, because that's the hard problem. Rationality is not the hard problem. I agree. A hard problem is what's relevant and what should we pay attention to. And that's part of flattening the world. When we try to make everything relevant and everyone relevant, well, this point of view is really relevant to me, And then that's not why are you privileging that person over all the other people who have points of view? Well, that's a good question. I bet you can't explain that. All right. And it gets really difficult really fast. And that's a problem. Like, these are actual problems in the world that people run into. And making it worse is not making it better. So you have to contain things in the frame that they're at instead of ever expanding them out. And the expansion, in a way, is actually a flattening. Oh, we want to consider everything all at once. No, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to consider the things that I've narrowed down to consider. And if that's, not accounting for something, then I will suffer the consequences of that. Don't you worry. It's okay.
Right. And the problem with reframing is there's unintended consequences, right? So I had this problem, or I have this problem all the time with people, right, where they change the subject of the conversation by doing this reframe, right? Like so there's this conversation going on about something, and then, but what about this, right? Like, have you considered this? And it's like I now have two options, right? Like I have to reject you, which is engage in a conflict effectively, right? Or the conversation has to go to that subject, right? Like that substream of what's going on, and this stuff happens all the time, right? And I'm not saying it's a problem to change the conversation, right? But I think if you say, have you considered, it's better to say, I want to talk about this part, right? And then you're standing behind it, right? Like it's not an implicit, well, like it's not a criticism, right? Because if you're asking for, have you considered, right? Like you're implicitly saying, well, I don't see this being accounted for, and I think you should account for it, right? Like because you're making it relevant, right? Like saying you should consider something is making it relevant. And there's two ways in which things can be relevant, right? Like when you have this highly theoretical framing where you're just trying to explain everything, right? Like you want to have this universal theory that accounts for every problem in the universe, then yes, right? Like everything can be added, and everything has to be included, and therefore it's relevant, right? But when you're just trying to do something in the here and now, like making a decision whether to go to Walmart or not, there's only a really limited set of things that are relevant, right? Like, so have you considered whether you have gas in your car, or have you considered whether you brought your money, right? Like things like that, right? These are relevant, but they're only relevant if you're assuming that the person hasn't done them, right? Like, and so there's an implicit criticism in there, right? Like, and you yeah, like, and you're reframing the situation, right? Like,
Right.
like, oh, now I have to worry about whether I have gas in the car, or now I have to worry about this, right? Like, so you're putting an obligation upon the other person by doing that reframing.
Yeah, and also, so the thing that's been occurring to me now is there's a tyranny of universalism and materialism. And if you're a materialist and you're trying to universalize, what you're really trying to do is get equality. And you're trying to not exclude. You're saying, oh, well, look, 80%, you're only considering 80% of the people, or 80% of the problem, or you're using 80% of this. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm a pragmatist. I understand losses are inevitable. And so 80% is pretty damn good from my perspective. And if you want to care about the 20%, well, you can go do that. But making me care about the 20% is that's a transgression. Like if you want to care for the lepers, go care for the damn lepers. Don't get on my ass because I'm not caring for the damn lepers. Like, what the hell? Like, it's different people should be doing different things. The problem with that is that you get too spread out and then nobody wants to cooperate anymore. Fair enough. That's why you build structures, right? That's what structures are for. They're to enable cooperation between people and let them take advantage of their skill sets. And so there's a tyranny in trying to measure everything and then trying to account for the margin, as Peugeot would say, right? So when you say, oh, well, look, your ethical system requires 130 IQ, right? This is roughly the discussion that Peterson had with Harris in the fourth debate that they did there, of those initial 4 debates. And what about the other people, right? And then my point is, well, ethics has to include everybody or it's not ethics. It's just that simple. That doesn't mean that everybody can equally involve themselves in the pursuit of ethics. And it doesn't mean everybody is an equal ethical agent. It just means that ethics has to account for everybody. But most other things don't. Maybe no other things do, or maybe no other things can't, because there's a lot of randomness out there, right? Like you can't expect everybody to be able to engage with the Bible equally. You can't expect everybody to be able to engage with meditation equally. You can't expect everybody to be able to engage with a deep philosophical discussion equally. You can't expect everybody to be able to understand what you're talking about. And you can't expect yourself to be able to explain it to anybody. I think that's a ridiculously high bar. It's totally insane and it's unhelpful. It's just not reasonable request for you to be able to do something for everybody all at once. That's not reasonable. And we tend to project our care for the marginalized and turn that into a reason to change everything. And that's not valid. If you care for the marginalized, you go do that. I support you, right? I'm not also going to do that. I'm going to care for the largest number that I can care for because that's my ethos. That's where I'm at. It's a different place. There's nothing wrong with either, right? But there is something wrong if you're saying you need to care about these 20% in your system. No, I don't. My system is okay if it doesn't care about the 20%. And that's the problem.
Yeah, it's not only whether you should care about the 20%. It's also we can't do everything all the time all at once. Like there's this thing about combinatorial explosion, right? Like if everybody's gonna have to deal with your philosophy and with reading the Bible and with familiarizing themselves with the Eastern traditions and with getting up to date on the latest soccer match, like how do we privilege things, right? Like it's not good to have everybody do everything, and we shouldn't want to. And like in the end, we tell people things so that they can act in the world, right? So all they need to understand are the implications to their life. And if we go beyond that, right, and then we're making a transgression, right? Like we can't make people do things, right? Like, but we want to provide the tools for people to make the right decision, right? And you want to pick freedom's lunch because like.
Sure. So we are all marginalized. What did I fall into? Well, look, I mean, you fell into creation. Yes. If you want to play the game of equality, universalization, and materialism, by some measure, we are all marginalized on more than one axis. All of us. Now what? This is the problem with equality. Like, making universal statements is lovely, but it cannot tell you anything about how to act in the world. So the fact that we're all marginalized doesn't help us understand anything, even though it's true, right? Truth is not going to save you, right? Truth is a state of a statement or a fact or a set of observations that is thoroughly unhelpful by itself, because the truth of something doesn't tell you what to do about it. This is, roughly speaking, the Izot gap, Hume's guillotine. If you haven't looked it up, you can look up Izot gap or Hume's guillotine, right? And I like this. I like this follow-up, right? Equality is the reductionist view of the fruit of living, an example of how Christ loved his disciples, right? It's the reductionist view is also the flattening of the world. And again, this is what part of what we're talking about. When you try to flatten the world, when you try to do this, oh, excellent, yes, materialist reductionist, right? Or physicalist, reductionist physicalist is what John Vervaeke calls it. When you do that, that ends up in equality, and equality is not the state that we have unless evolution is wrong. Like, all parts of evolutionary theory have to be wrong for equality to be true. That's why I don't think equality is true. I think equality is antithetical to evolution, and I believe in the observation of evolution, right? When you flatten the world, right, and that's actually one thing we're dealing with now. When you flatten the world to know there's only one hierarchy with Christ at the top, and then we're all at the bottom, you create a bunch of problems. Like, you can't cooperate with other people to do things, because in order to cooperate with other people, you need to build a tiny hierarchy beneath Christ in order to create a structure and rules and boundaries, right, and authorities, and get leaders in there, engender leadership in order to be more efficient at building something bigger than one person can build. So that's a mini hierarchy underneath the larger hierarchy. When you ignore that and you squish the world, you run into all kinds of problems. This is part of the problem, I think, with this idea of Christian anarchy, right? They don't want to do things, right? They don't want to be responsible. They don't want to build something bigger than themselves necessarily, or bigger than, we'll say, their immediate family or something. And so they say, oh, anarchy, right? And really they're talking about Christian pacifism, and they don't want to take responsibility. Fine, fair enough, right? But they don't really understand. Associating yourself with anarchists is a bad idea, because they're extremely violent and they've caused revolutions. Like, the way you cause a revolution, historically speaking, is you get the anarchists upset, which isn't really hard, and invite them into your place, right? And then they start the revolution. Then the true revolutionaries come to the fore. They shoot all the anarchists, by the way, typically. And then they take over, right? And then maybe somebody else takes over, because it's usually the course of these revolutions, right? When you actually dig into history, you kind of see this pattern. And so you can't just recognize one hierarchy in the world. There are many hierarchies, and we have to participate in many of them. We can't just flatten the world so that we can have one identity. Oh, I'm just a follower of Jesus and a reader of the Bible, or a follower of Muhammad, or I follow the Tao, or whatever the heck it is. You can't just reduce the world to that. You have to live in it with other people, with nature, and with yourself. You don't know yourself that well. You don't know what you're projecting on. You don't know what sorts of damage you're doing by just running around in the world and spewing whatever you're spewing all over the place. You have no idea. And it's true for all of us. So, it's a problem.
So yeah, like, I want to take that into telos, right? Which is purpose or calling, right? So there's an identity that you get by pursuing a goal, and that pursuing of the goal, like going to Walmart, puts you in a relevance ring, right? Like, now you can discern things that are relevant to you, and you can discern things that are irrelevant to you. And when you have that relevance framing, now you can plan a path to there, right? And then when you have the path, right, like when you're capable of manifesting what you want to manifest, then you can start being considerate of things, right? Like you can say, well, like maybe I don't want to take this highway, right? Like I want to have the scenic route, right? Like I want to be considerate of my mental health, right? I want to have this music playing, right? But you can't start with the music. You can't start with the, and then, right? Like there's a limit there, right? Like you like at a certain point you need to go to the Walmart, right? And you're going to need to be among people, and you're going to need to make decisions in there, and so there's all of this bad stuff, right? Or stuff that you could be considerate about, but now you're going to have to reject being considerate in order to actually achieve your goal. And so yeah, like we have to see also in how we're affecting ourselves with our considerations, right? Like because when I'm trying to be considerate of some things, right? Like I'm gonna manifest some things in the world, and I'm also not gonna manifest other things in the world, right? So if I wanna take the scenic route, right? Like I have to take extra time traveling, right? And that extra time traveling I can't spend on being with my family or whatever, right? Like there's all of these costs in that determination, right? And then there's also, well, like if I take 15 minutes preparing for going to Walmart, right? Like because I want to have everything perfect, then that 15 minutes I need to be considerate of the consequences of my consideration, because now I have to spend 15 minutes every time I want to take a trip, right? And that might involve me not wanting to do the preparations, and instead of being hesitant to do the trip, I now become hesitant to do the preparations, and I've moved the problem a step back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of this gets wrapped up in this flattening of the language and of the world, and not understanding the difference between consideration of people and consideration of things or ideas, right? Like being considerate towards somebody is different from giving things consideration. That's totally different. And we're conflating the two out of what we were talking about before, tolerance, right? Or kindness or compassion or whatever, which is not an untrammeled pure good in the world. It's not. Like, I'm sorry. You can't just solve all the problems by saying, well, I'm just going to meet everybody with love and compassion. It's not going to work. Like, it's not even an option. And by doing that, you're condescending to people. Like, and maybe that's okay, but not in that case. Not if you're doing it prejudgmentally before you've even met them or know what they're about. Not pushing back. Peterson makes this point over and over again. I don't understand why this is a mystery to people. Yeah, being nice to people weakens them. Do you want weak people? Because that's what you're going to get. Do you want ants? That's how you get ants. Do you want weak people? That's how you get weak people. And, it's just frustrating because people are so upset about having to do the work. And that's really what this boils down to. People are lazy. Thinking is hard and nobody wants to do the work. And like, fair enough. I get it. But don't be mad at people who are doing the work, because it's hard and they're having a rough day. Like doing the work is difficult, and tolerance can certainly be negligence. That is true, Ethan. Ethan's a little on the extreme side of the tolerance bad equation, in my opinion. However, we love Ethan, and he's not necessarily wrong. So yeah,
I think he's also in the wrong live stream.
I know, you should have put that in the other live stream. Is consideration a niceness the same thing? I guess in my mind, they're not, right? Yeah, I mean, look, you're not always helping people when you're being nice to them. Right? Period. End of statement. I'm sorry. And can I tell you when that is? No, I'm sorry. I can't tell you when that is. You've put in the hard work yourself. Like, really? I'm not joking. It's hard. And that's why you need to have grace towards others when you perceive that they do it wrong. Because A, maybe you're wrong and they did it right. And B, maybe they screwed up, but we all screw up. Like, it's not that hard. Like, do you have the same grace for the person doing the action as you have for the victim? There's a good question to ask yourself. Because maybe the person that you perceive as a victim was actually victimized, but the person you perceive as the perpetrator of that victimization made a mistake. Who should you have more compassion for? Who should you have more grace for? Who should you, punish in that situation? These are hard things. I'm not proposing answers, but I'm saying, are you spreading the grace around equally? Are you sure? Or are you just picking sides? Because I think you're picking sides, and you're arbitrarily picking the side of the underdog in all cases, which is elevating the margin, which, if you listen to Peugeot, Jonathan Peugeot, no, don't do that. Can't make the margin the center. You can't focus on it to the exclusion of everything that isn't in the margin. That is an error. That is a mistake. Do not do that. It's bad. Flat out.
Which does not mean don't serve the margin, right? But maybe it means don't serve the margin by lifting it up to the center, or by shining the light on it, right? Like, maybe what the margin needs is to have a safe space on the margin instead of a spotlight on it. So there's many ways to resolve the issue, right? And I think there's a third victim, right? Like, there's the person that made the mistake, right? There's the person that's being victimized, but then there's also the situation, right? Like, and I think we're forgetting the situation, which involves more people, right? Because there's other people that are judging what is happening and interceding, right? And so what is the thing that you want to protect, right? Like, what is the thing that rectifies or redeems what just happened, right? Because that's where you want to go. Well, do you want to redeem by redirecting all the attention towards the transgression, right? Or do you want to redeem the situation by actually getting to a resolution and having everybody feeling satisfied that they were a part of manifesting something good in the world, right? And I think that we're getting too close to this personal sense of justice. Like, oh, what should happen is that this person should feel heard, or
it's individualism, right? And we're prejudging that there's a victim, and we're prejudging who the perpetrator is, and maybe that's not what happened. Like, maybe your read on the situation is just freaking wrong, and maybe you're casting something into the future that hasn't happened. But we don't want a bad leader. Did you have any leader? Like, is that even valid until you have a leader? How do you know they're bad or not until they've led the thing? I don't get it. I did want to address this. I wanted to address this this issue, right? Without a bridging ethic, competing ethics can't tolerate without risking harm. The people preaching tolerance are also undermining America's bridging standard, the Bill of Rights. Yeah, well, look, I would say you don't need individual ethics. It's just not necessary. Like, it's just not a requirement. Like, ethics should be a universal. And that's a better way to do it. Now, ethics is the art of dealing with the conflict of virtues and values in the moment. And that resolves that issue. And I would say morality is the implementation of that, right? So I think that's, super important to realize and engage with. You don't want to get stuck in a continual set of deconstructions. I don't think that's useful. And you can, if you start giving everybody individual decisions, individual responsibilities, individual ethics, right? Because you can't have competing ethics, because who is to decide what a valid ethic is and what size what size to engage in? Like, if 40 people get together and decide this is their ethic, is that okay? And then 40 other people get together and they have a competing ethic, like, that's not okay. It's all too arbitrary. So You can't keep fractionating things down to the level of the individual. It's one of the areas that I disagree with Peterson on, is this emphasis on the individual, right? Because it doesn't allow for ethics. Like, you can't be an ethical agent and an individual. Like, you gotta pick one. Ethics doesn't make any sense to a single person. It can't. And also, a single person can't embody ethics because it involves the consideration of a bunch of people that you cannot meet and are never going to meet and are never going to be able to know. But your actions affect all of them. That's why you follow ethics. And that's the problem.
So, yeah, I think we should consider the state of people we're interacting with, and like I don't know if we're talking about a state in the United States or a state like mental state or whatever, but in some sense it doesn't matter, right? Like, yes, right? Like, we need to personalize our relationships, right? Like, we need to find intimacy within our relationships, but there's also an element in which people are fulfilling a role, right? Like, and in that sense, they're an object participating in a schema, right? So depending on what game we're playing, what are we trying to do, right? Like, are we in a board meeting, and like is the director talking, and like should the secretary then have their say? Well, no, right? Like, even if they're upset, right? Like, they go outside and be upset outside, right? So there is a sense in which considering the state is appropriate in certain types of interaction, and other types of interaction are privileging something else to be manifested, and so I think what we consider is a consequence of what are we doing.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the question of ethics and morality is a big question, and we've actually covered that here. It was a long conversation, but it was a good one, and it's not my only coverage of it. But I think the problem is the way people seem to be using the term. Ethics is the ideal, or the eidos, or the Platonic form, and morality is the implementation. And I think framing it backwards is part of the confusion. And I think value is underneath your ethics. And that's, it's not shared ethics, it's shared ethic. Like, again, it has to be a universal. Otherwise, it doesn't actually work. And that's really the issue for me, is that we're very confused about these things. And I know that
I want to take that remark a little bit. So
go ahead.
The implication.
You got to take Ethan's response too afterwards.
Okay, we'll take Ethan's response as well. So I think the implication of this, right, is we can't exchange value without shared ethics. It's like, no, like the value is in one person and another person, right? So all you need to do is have a framework, right? Not an ethic, but a framework that allows cooperation, right? Now, if you want to say, well, it's suboptimal, right? Like that cooperation could be organized differently, right? It could flow down from the ethic, and then it would be natural in some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then yes, but no, we can have cooperation, right? Like, we trade with China, like like we're not in agreement with China's ethical system as the West, but that doesn't stop us from doing a whole bunch of things with them. And then yeah, meta ethics. Okay, yes, we add meta. And then we add meta again, and then we've solved it. Like that's just the perfect solution.
It solves all problems. Can confirm. I have a video on that, obviously, on navigating patterns, because I hate the word meta. It's being so misused, and it's all based on a publisher's marketing scam. Congratulations for falling for a publishing marketing scam, you muppets. Yeah, I mean, I think that no, you can't be an individual and part of an ethical collective. No, you can't. Like, actually can't. Like, no, that's not a valid way of behaving in the language. The words don't fit together. I think that really is the problem, is that ethics has to be universal or it doesn't work.
So
And
yeah, I want to frame this a little bit, right? So
I'm accurately describing you as an actual Muppet and you're taking offense. You should be thrilled that somebody's finally recognized your true self. That's good.
yeah, like if you identify as a Muppet, you can have an ethic.
You can have the Muppet ethic with the rest of us. We're all Muppets. It's great.
But yeah, so I think you can be a person and in an ethical system, right? But the individual implies that there's an individual component to the ethical system, like that.
And no relationship. Like, when you say individual, you are purposely separating yourself from the relations you have in the wider world. And I think that is an invalid frame. In other words, there's no such thing as an individual, really. Like, we were all born into creation or a creation, and we're stuck with the results of that, for better or for worse, right? And you can get all Calvinist about it and say, aha, like, power of God, and therefore, however these Calvinists like to couch these crazy determinism arguments. And fair enough, like, maybe you should. But you were born, and as far as anybody knows, you didn't have a choice in that. And so you have to deal with that fact. And so you're not an individual because you couldn't take care of yourself when you were born, right? So your parents had all kinds of imprinting on you that you can't possibly even begin to understand. And that's okay. It's also bad, but like, it's mostly good. And you can modify some of that, yay, in the moment: journaling, meditation, contemplation, right? Whatever, prayer, going to church, right? Interacting with other people and say, oh, that other person doesn't act like I remember my parents acting. Maybe I can act differently too, right? Like, but you're still subject to all of those things. Like, you weren't dropped in this world conscious with no history. That didn't happen. So therefore, you're not an individual. And that's the problem. Now, the problem of individualism, right? I can't escape being an individual. I'm the only proof I have that's not true. Not being an owner of the self doesn't mean I don't exist. I steward my life. Ownership is a myth. Well, I don't know about that. If ownership is a myth, then you don't own yourself. And I think, actually, oddly, ownership is not a myth, but you also don't own yourself. Like, it's not just you in that head of yours. That's what you realize when you start meditating. Vervaeke talks about this. Vervaeke's meditation course is just excellent. He talks about this, right? You close your eyes and suddenly you realize there's all kinds of stuff going on in my head that I don't normally engage in. What is happening? Why is this going on? And then over time, through meditation, contemplation, right, reflection, things like that, you can gain more control over some of that. You don't gain complete control, but self-control is a good place to start. And I mean, you own things in that you are responsible for your body because you own it. Like, it's something that you need to care for.
And for your actions as well.
Right. You own your actions as an agent in the world. It's something you need to own and take responsibility for, right? As difficult as that may be. These are definitely things that you own. And you have to take them seriously in some sense, or things are going to go horribly wrong for you. This is part of Jordan Peterson's message. And that's the interesting thing to me. Like, Peterson kind of clear about all this. And people hear stuff from Peterson and everyone's hearing, slightly different things, I'm sure. But yeah, a lot of people are missing sort of the larger message. And that's part of his message, is that you don't know what you're up to. You don't know what's going on in your head. You don't know what drives every action that you take, but you're still responsible for those actions. And that's, that's important to acknowledge. You're an agent in the world. And therefore, right, if you go and on YouTube and you get a YouTube audience, you have some responsibility for having gathered that YouTube audience, you know? And if you don't interact with them, like you never answer your comments or something, then that's going to go away and you're going to create anger and resentment, and righteous anger and resentment in that case, because you didn't care for your audience correctly. I try not to make that mistake. Try to answer all my stuff. And I know.
Someone is funny. Okay, like we'll put this one on.
Grim Grizz said there is no agency and he's way funner than you. We are not as fun as Grim Grizz. That I can assure you. And we never will be. That I can also
sometimes
assure you.
We are though.
Well, sometimes we get there, but
sometimes
like on balance, we're not gonna be that way that much of the time like he can. He's got special skills, man.
But yeah, like that's the way that you're right? If you're funny, you're right. That's the way.
Yeah. Well, and
talking about ownership and responsibility and stuff like that, right? Like not part of, like the full reason we're doing these live streams is to get people to a place of having a discernment, right? So that they can take these responsibilities, right? So consideration at first sight is a positive, right? It's like, oh, like you're taking into account something that wasn't taken into account. Like that's good, right? Like that's just a natural plus. But there's second order effect, right? Like there's implications, right? Like we were talking about, like it's costing resources, right? But it's also reframing things, right? Like it's changing the consideration that you're making, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, and if you're not looking at all this other stuff that's happening, the decision that you're making is influenced, right? Like you're biased in a certain direction, and that's what we're trying to overcome, right? Like so when we're talking about ethics or whatever, right? Like what it is important to consider the connectedness of yourself with others, right? And then, well, when you have a system, right? Like you accept that you're in a system, well, then maybe the responsibility that you have, right, or the ownership that you have extends beyond yourself towards that system, right? And so now you have a responsibility of participation in the system, but that participation in the system cannot be the same for every individual, right? Like, because people don't have the same capacity, right? So now you have to account for the different capacities and the different priorities and all of that stuff in your ethical system. And I got this thing, right? Like we're having a trade agreement, right? Like a trade agreement is actually the opposite of an ethical system. It is putting things into words, right, or procedures, so that we don't have to be ethical in our behavior, right? Like because now we can outsource our ethics to the agreement. So it is actually the opposite, right? Like you're effectively saying we don't trust that this will happen in the right way, and therefore we need to police it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think look, stewardship and ownership, I don't know how you're differentiating those two, but you're going to die. Nothing allows you to escape the reality of your impending death, because it's going to happen. And we need to know that. And I don't think we try to escape death. I don't think that's a correct way of looking at the world. I think that a stewardship is roughly something that you are apart from and taking responsibility for. And what we're talking about is something that you are a part of and taking responsibility for. Those are different fundamental states. And those states are important. You are embedded in a creation. Hopefully, you believe that being is good, because that is an excellent foundation. And therefore, you take ownership right? And responsibility for the things that are directly impacted by you. That includes your body. That includes your speech, because you have control over that, right? It's a very stoic way of thinking about the world. Do you have perfect control? No. And it's also important to recognize that, because mercy and grace are not just for other people. They're first for yourself. And when that doesn't happen, that's a problem. That's a big problem. Okay. When you outsource your ethics or the results of your activity in the world to someone or something else, and I'm glad that you brought it up, that your life's not your own, it's Christ's. Yeah, in some sense, except he still says render unto Caesar. I don't know how that's possible at the same time. Like, and this is the problem with the concept like Christian anarchy, right? The reason why Christian anarchy can't exist is either you're misusing the term anarchy entirely, or you're misunderstanding and misusing the term Christianity entirely, because they have a contradictory nature, right? Either, anarchy means no submission to authority, which is certainly the dictionary definition. And if you want to say, no, it only means no submission to political authority, that's not what it means. But okay, even in that case, the problem comes with an issue, right? And that issue is Christ didn't just say render unto Caesar, right? He also submitted to the authorities of Rome and the authorities of the Jews, right? To the extent that he was crucified and killed, right? Like that happened. So if you want to be a Christian, a follower of Christ, you have to submit to the authority of Rome, which I would argue is political, and the authority of the Jewish local political system. And so I don't see how you can be an anarchist in either of those situations. I don't think that the word anarchy is loaded at all. I don't think it has competing meanings. Words don't have meanings. See my video. Meanings come from content plus context. But anarchy is pretty clear. But anarchy is a statement of an identification against, which is, I know, Manuel's favorite topic, identification against. All anarchy says is that I don't want to replace politics or political authority with anything. I just don't want the political authority, as though that's an option in the world. What do you think about identification against, Emmanuel? How do you feel about it? Let me know.
Yes. So what it's saying is there can only be individual authority, right? And then there's some natural progression from individual authority to corporation, right? So there's a presumption there. There's a presumption there that that something beautiful will emerge, right? Like, and so that is dependent upon the ethical framework of the participants, right? But so there's a couple points there, right? So first of all, like now those participants have to be fully submerged in the ethical framework and effectively be proper self-regulators, because they're explicitly rejecting the authority of the externality to regulate themselves, insofar as they're going to accept voluntarily the authority of others, which again, right? So and then, well, so let's just say you're going to build structures from that point on, right? Which might be possible, right? Like at a certain point, you get to a scaling point, right? Like you get to a point where the political authority, right, which is going to arise, which is like a contradiction, right? Like, because we're all cooperating anyway, right? So we're going to have to make a new political structure to govern ourselves, and that's going to be too far away from the individual, right? Like now there's going to be conflicts as a consequence of space and time between people, right? Like just because of the local culture. And so you're going to run into the same problems that we have right now, right? Like maybe they get resolved better because we're all perfect Christians, which you can't be, by the way, but whatever, right? And then we haven't even talked about the problems between those people and the people around them, right? Because like if you're flat out going to reject authority, like America is not going to like that, right? Like they're going to consider you as a threat, and probably rightfully so, right? Like
Well, you're going to get violent. I mean, anarchists are violent for a reason because they don't want the state over them, but they don't have an option because they're identifying against. And yeah, when you identify against, you're not identifying for. And so you have a definitions problem, which is you're not defining yourself for something, you're just rejecting something. And if all you do is reject something, then you're not able to conform. And then that's the problem. What happens is anarchy, which is just the ultimate statement of individualism, right? Just the ultimate statement. I'm never going to cooperate with anybody else ever again under any circumstances because I can't, because I'm rejecting the idea of a structure that would allow that to happen. That's actually all anarchy is the statement of. So then what happens is people get upset because their agency in the world is reduced because it's just them, because the anarchy is the ultimate statement of individualism. And then they say, well, I've got to find other people like me because we're tribal animals and we're not stupid. Like, it's not us who's tribal animals. Tribalism is way before humans, by the way. People seem to confuse that. Humans became tribalistic. No, long before humans evolved, tribalism was in the animal kingdom. And we were of the type of animals that were always tribal. And so the problem is that anarchy can't have categories because it's identification against. And a lot of words are like this, right? There are words that can't have categories. They defy categorization because they are identifying against the thing. Like Protestantism, when you identify against a thing, you just end up splintering forever. And let's see if Ethan's truck is quiet enough. Tell us, Ethan.
I'm going to pull over up here, but if it's not too loud, why doesn't Freedom Lunch come on and talk in real time? Some good things to discuss there.
Yeah, well, potentially. So Manuel, why don't you go on your diatribe again about why identifying against is a problem, other than the fact of categorization doesn't work, and that's.
Well, yeah. So when we're identifying against, we're taking an identity that is informed by the other, right? So everything we do is in relationship to the other thing, and that means that we're being controlled by that, right? Like it has possession over our actions. It's effectively being a demon. It's the sword of Damocles that always hangs over you, and you need to account for at all times, right? Because else you're not identifying against anymore, right? So you can look an addiction again as identifying against being under the state of influence, right? And like all the things that I do in the world are now in some way related to maintaining my capacity to get into that state. And that means that like I am totally possessed. Like I have no freedom, and depending on my ease of access to that, right? Like every action I perform is going to be in order to manifest that. And then there's my ethics, right? Like will have to submit to that. Like it will necessarily have to be lesser than that because my highest value needs to be sustained, and like it's not the ethics. And so you can even take that towards God, right? Like so if you say God is everything, right, all the potential in the world, then you lose the connection to all the potential in the world, right? And now we're talking about reciprocally narrowing to a subset, right? And you literally end up in a state where you cannot see the potential. Like the potential is invisible to you, right? And so what you want to do is you want to identify for something, right, in relationship to all the potential that there is, so that you can use it when appropriate, right? So the ideal state of being is that you can take what is offered to you as an option and manifest that in relation to your goal, to your talents, right? Like your purpose, like your calling. And when you can constantly do that, then you enter into a state where you can turn everything towards the good, right? Like, 'cause your purpose is in service of the good. And when you're identified against something for whatever reason, right? Like, there's a bear crossing your path, and you have to take an identity against the bear. Like, now you can no longer do the good, right? Like, now you have to deal with the bear, right? And as long as you have to take that identity against the bear, you can no longer manifest the good, right? And so that's the problem with anarchy, right? Like, you cannot have this identity as a primary consideration. Like you can have objections against whatever political system, whatever, like, that's fine, but there is a necessity for the system, right? Like, and you're going to have a level of participation with the system, whether that's with the police or whether with the tax office, right? Like, you get to choose. you got to pick one. And
Right.
and like, I can tell you that, like, it's better to pay the tax office, because, like, you're identifying against is going up when you have to deal with the police.
Right, right. And I think our natural, again, just like our natural inability to live as an individual on our own by ourselves, unconnected from the world, is at odds with hierarchy, right? Fair enough. So there's a conflict there, right? We have to resolve that conflict in some fashion. We have to be able to say, you know what? I really just want to do what I want to do, how I want to do it, when I want to do it, where I want to do it. But if I do that, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. Maybe I can't. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't have enough strength. Maybe, maybe it takes two people to do it, right? Or more, right? And so then I have to, call somebody up, right? Or, like, poor Ethan had to deal with me having the top down in the car. And I made a mistake, right? Because I asked him and then I forgot to put the top up, right? But he got a ride from the airport to Thunder Bay, right? And it's just like, okay, Mark's a screw up, and he just screwed it up, and that happens, right? But we have to be able to accept those conflicts to get what we want, because otherwise he's walking from freaking Minneapolis airport to Thunder Bay, Canada. It's gonna take a while because it's 6.5 hour drive or something. So he saves on gas. But, it's a long walk, and you got to walk with all your stuff.
Yeah. I just thought it was kind of funny when I got in there. It's like, this bothers him absolutely zero because he has no hair at all. Yeah, I really like the identifying against as not a good thing, because if you to do the Peterson triangle thing, when you're identifying, especially if you're looking at things from a non-dualistic perspective, which is the correct way to look at them, because there's no such thing as dualism. There's just you've got a point of you got a point up here, and then you have it just goes in, it just keeps going down till it becomes nothing or pure potential. And if you're identifying against this, you become inverted. It's parasitic, and where, like, you're just pointing down to the ground until you turn into nothing. Where now, if you have like a different point of identity, and this point is not in frame here. So if this point is in conflict with this point, this identity, I mean, that's better. Versus just identifying against, you're just pointing down into nothing, and you're not going to create anything. Nothing good is going to come out of it. So you're not pointed towards building anything.
Yeah, right. Or well, you can say, well, I need to build a fence, right, for the neighbor, and then I get some money so I can get my hit, or whatever, right? Like, so you can build, but the building is in service of getting the money, which is in service of doing the thing that you want to do, right? So there, but there's a fundamental thing, right? Like, you can't be generative in the right way, right? Like that's the problem. Like, there's always a perversion, right? Like, you can always say, well, like, I am a drunk, right? Like, I am having a bad day. I still helped the old lady cross the sidewalk, and I did a good thing, right? Because like you can do that, right? And people do that, right? Like so, and good for them because they should, right? But they're still stuck in that loop, right? Like they're still stuck in the loop of serving the alcohol, and it's important to get out of the loop, right? And whatever loop it is, right? Like there's ways that you can get caught in walking in circles that's just not productive, and it's hard for us to identify what that is, right? Because the reason that we do it is because we're reserving something that we think is necessary, right? Like there's always this component about I have to do this, right? Like for whatever justification you're bringing up for yourself, and that's the thing that keeps you in the cycle. So often the I have to do this is associated with trauma, right? Like if I don't get my alcohol, right, I'm gonna feel shit, and like I can't sustain that state, right? Like I so therefore it's not an option to engage with that state, and the only way that you can get out is to face that, right? Like you have to face that part of yourself that keeps putting you into that state, right? So if we're talking about anarchy, right, like you're rebelling, like why are you rebelling against authority, right? Like what is this authority doing to you that is that bad, right? Like okay, they're asking a lot of money from you, from your income, right? But they're also providing you a place to get income, right? Like and a means to get to your work and all of that stuff, right? And when someone takes the income from you on the road, right, they're gonna try and catch the person, right? Or at least they should. So that stuff is all built in, and it's like yeah, like that's suboptimal, right? Like there's a lot of money going to waste, right? Like they're not using your tax dollars in a way that they could, right? Or theoretically, because maybe they are using them in the way that they could, because that's the limitations of working in large systems, right? Like that might actually be true. Like how much optimization can you still get out of this large system? Because like it's hard, right? Like when I talk to people, like sometimes I'm surprised that things even work at all, right? So then like that there's this large system with all of these separate things moving individually but also together, and like that's a miracle that even works, right? And so yeah, like there's a tyrannical aspect to that, right? But there's a tyrannical aspect to identifying against it as well, right? And you're just like, well, I chose this tyranny, and like I'm not choosing this other tyranny which I can't understand and can't control, right? But that's yeah, like where's that grounded, right? Like is that what kind of insecurity are you chasing at that point?
Yeah, and something that people don't. I feel like we have this aversion towards authority. We think that like for some reason, well, there are reasons that we know of that we could get into, but we seem to confuse. Everyone seems to confuse authority with tyranny, and they're not the same thing. They're definitely not the same thing, and they fail to understand that tyranny actually doesn't last that long. If somebody's a tyrant, like I mean, you do want to avoid tyrants because really bad things can happen, but they don't last that long. Like usually, if a tyrant gets in power, things usually correct themselves, or the tyrant will go away. It's not like you're going to put a tyrant in power and just suffer under them forever. And like you need somebody in power.
Well, yeah, the problem with tyranny is that people participate with it, right? So people identify against a spirit, right? Like a perceived spirit of the tyranny, right? And when that perceived spirit of oppression is big enough, then they're going to participate in it and reinforce it, right? So, but yeah, like at that is unsustainable. Like this I don't know, this philosophical experiment or something, or maybe it's actually a psychological experiment, right? Like when you have a group of people and they're cooperating, and one group is voluntarily cooperating and the other group isn't, like over the long run, the cooperative group is going to outperform the tyrannical group, because there's energy that the system has being wasted on the imposition of the tyranny, right? So in energy terms, that is going to happen, right? But like we should realize that the communist regime has manifested itself for many, many years before it went away. And I would argue that the Nazi regime, if they didn't make a bunch of decisions, also could have maintained itself for considerable duration, right? Like they were planning for 1,000 years, and like I don't think they were idiots or fools or whatever. So yeah, like these things are iffy, like, and you could make the argument like, oh, they're gonna always make the bad decision, like maybe, but yeah.
The thing is the fascism. I mean, speaking beyond myself, but it seems to me that was a lot more practical than the communism. That actually probably would have lasted a lot longer, because that type of, governance had existed before in history. Like the Spartans did it for like 700 years.
Right.
It's just anti-Christian. It's not a Christian way. It's not a Christian way of organizing society.
Yeah. I think it's important to realize, and Carl Benjamin Sargon-of-Akkad did this first. Right? He said, fascism is just honest socialism. In other words, it's the end of the road for all socialist schemes, end in fascism. And I think that's actually correct. I think that, I'm not a reductionist, but things do reduce sometimes down to simpler forms. Mm. And you can't maintain any kind of socialism whatsoever without it devolving into fascism. It's not possible. I think it's mathematically certain. I think if you model it, and people have, that's where it leads. I mean, ultimately, the state, which is the larger entity, should take priority in all cases over the individual if top-down power from above is true. Now, I don't believe top-down power from above is true. The Christians don't believe that either, because that's not their ethos. And when you don't understand that, and it's nuanced, and it's hard, and not everybody can understand it, I'm sorry. That may include you, and it may include you with 110 IQ. I have no idea. I'm not making any claims. I'm saying not everybody understands the nuance that top-down power from above is bullshit. It's wrong. And that Christianity is not top-down power from above, because we have freedom to aim at the good or aim at the bad, right? Roughly speaking, right? We can enact good, we can enact evil, and we can enact something that's, fully neutral in the world, like just full of potential. Because the neutral position is also the position of potential. The potential could manifest good or bad, right? Over time, who knows, right? But that concept is difficult for people. So they squish everything down to top-down power from above. And therefore, you have to do what the president says. No, you don't. I think that's ridiculous. And in the US, it's absolutely flat out wrong. Like the Congress sets the laws, not the damn president. Not that he doesn't do something that you have to obey, but he doesn't set the laws.
Yeah. I'll just say this and let you guys get back to it. It was somewhere in the Republic. Plato uses this example of as a ship captain, and he's conversing with Glaucon and the other guy, and he asked, does the ship captain act purely for his own sake, or is he acting for something else? It's like, well, if he was acting purely for his own sake, he wouldn't be a ship captain, because there wouldn't be a ship. So the ship captain is submitting himself. I don't know. I can't remember the language. And of course I don't speak Greek, but the ship captain is submitting himself to I'm going to use the word higher. He's submitting himself to a higher identity. I mean, you don't have to say it's higher. You could just say he's submitting himself to a spirit that they all participate in. So if he's the last point of, if he's at the point of the triangle right here, that's a power from, that's what you're saying.
top-down power. And that's not how it works, because if he was there, the ship would cease to work. He's submitting himself to something. I use the word higher, a higher identity, a higher principality that everybody is participating in. And
it
he's
has
just
to be higher because it's sub, which means under, right? So like,
you're submitted. When you're submitted, you're under something.
Yeah,
so
I think it's appropriate to language, but
right.
But
I think there's a distinction between submittance and surrender, right? So if you're submitting but you're not surrendering authority, that means that you're holding a different authority higher, right? So the ship's captain might be submitting, right? But like he might have a different authority or a different identity, effectively, right? Besides being a ship captain, that might be higher or lower than his identity of a ship captain, right? And I think when you go to honor systems, right, what the honor system says is make the ship captain the highest identity, and therefore all other identities that you have are submitted or surrendered to being a ship captain, right? And that's why you go down with your ship, right? Like that. And but there's a different system, right? Which is the Christian system, and like I think all religious monotheistic systems that say no, you have a different identity in relationship to God, which is a higher identity, right? And then if your identity as a ship captain comes into conflict with being a good person effectively, right? Like now you don't do what the ship captain is requiring you to do, but instead you're deferring to this higher authority and act according to that one.
Right. And you don't squish them. You don't flatten them. You say, no, there's a lower hierarchy and a higher hierarchy at the top level, whatever that is for you.
Right. So if your ship was, that's the underlying ethic that everyone subscribes to in a society that's Christian. It's like, okay, I'm a ship captain, but the moment that the ship comes into conflict with this ethic that we all subscribe to, or like, the ship is going to run over a bunch of innocent people or whatever. It's like, okay, stop, destroy, whatever. We'll cease being a ship because it's in conflict with this higher identity that we all subscribe to.
Right. That's sacrifice.
But the thing is like, I don't know if you. So like, what's going on with this whole leadership thing? And people are, people are so. They're so scared of the leader, blah blah blah. It's like we have to have a ship captain, and like even if we have a bad ship captain, if we're all orientated towards ship and navigating a ship, if we have a bad captain, we're going to replace him with a better captain. Like that's like as long as we're all orientated towards the common goal and spirit. That's why it's important when we're constructing or building this hierarchical structure that we're doing it. We state our purpose or we identify the spirit that we are all looking towards. And
right.
The moment that someone is not justly fitting their role, whether it's wherever it's at in the hierarchy, that will be replaced. Because like say you got a bad leader. Right. If that leader is submitted to the spirit of what it is we're trying to do, they're going to have no problem stepping down and letting somebody more competent step in. So right. We're not trying to build. You guys aren't trying to build a tyranny, and I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. Is we have such an animosity towards authority and leadership. We think that the leadership and authority are synonymous with tyranny, and people are trying to get. Like, it's not the same thing. We have to submit ourselves all to the same common purpose or spirit, whatever we want to call it, and say, if I become the leader and I'll last like 2 minutes or whatever until we see another leader come along, and I'll have no problem submitting or forfeiting my role to him because he's more competent and he serves the purpose better. So,
right. Well, where does it come from? It comes from the deep postmodern fear, right, that the postmodern critique of World War II or communism is correct, right? What was their critique? Well, I would argue it's not a critique, it's an observation, and they're all idiots. They're still idiots. They're still 3 years old, like literally, actually. They're not smart people. They're just not. I'm sorry. They write real pretty like but they ain't that bright at the end of the day. Their critique was, well, Hitler and Stalin had strong charismatic personalities, and that's how they were able to take over. First of all, that's wrong. It's just 1,000,000,000% in every possible way a complete mischaracterization of historical events. Full stop. Not that Hitler wasn't charismatic and not that Stalin wasn't charismatic, but that did not carry the day. What carried the day in Stalin's case was everybody knew that Stalin ran the hit squad, and they were afraid to not put him in place of Lenin. Full stop. Fear. That's all it was. He ruled through fear. Okay. In Hitler's case, the chancellorship pre-existed Hitler. It was already there. Someone was going to get that position, and if they did well, by saving Germany, and you could make some really strong and very good arguments that only Hitler could have done this. Fair enough. Maybe only Hitler could have saved Germany. I'm actually on board with that line of thinking. I think that's very likely that he was the only person capable of doing such a miraculous thing, because it was miraculous. Then, being appointed chancellor for life was a certainty. So the person didn't matter. Okay? But the postmodern critique says it's top-down power from above, and the way leaders get power is charisma and narrative capture, roughly speaking. I have a video on narrative capture, right? Rewriting the narrative so that people believe that narrative. And that's why they critique grand narrative. What's grand narrative? Grand narrative is your religion. The problem is, if, as I still maintain, religion is inevitable and non-optional, right? Like you will have a religion, whether you want one or not. Then when you remove the grand narrative, the religion, however you want to define that, the thing next in line becomes your new religion or grand narrative. And then when you remove that layer of grand narrative, the thing under, right, it just keeps going. And I think that's the problem, is people take the postmodern seriously. You should throw out all their garbage. It's all garbage, literally all of it. None of it is theirs. None of it is interesting. Their critiques are stupid, and they're just dumb people who, for some reason, wrote books that are pretty sounding, right? And confusing. And they're confusing because they're wrong. Think, this is confusing. Maybe it's wrong. Not all the time, but maybe, right? And then if you take that seriously, you don't want leaders because power corrupts, because top-down power from above. Like all of these other tropes that the postmoderns talked about to justify the fact that communism doesn't work because it's a bad idea. It's that simple. It's an idea that is flawed, but they want to defend it because they want to live in that utopia. So they're defending their utopia. That's their religion, by the way. My religion is perfect political system, ideal political system. That's what their whole ethos was, to protect that concept. And so top-down power from above, grand narrative, power corrupts, charisma is the thing that destroys our perfect idealistic political system. Fair enough. All of that is obviously, observably, completely incorrect, historically inaccurate, and absurd and ridiculous. No, really. Anybody for believing any of it. But that's where all of this is coming from. All of it.
And I think there's this other thing, right, which is also wrong. Like all power comes from below, right? Like which is also not true. Like there's an interaction between the top and the bottom, and that there's a dialogue between those two, which manifests everything, right? And there's a revolutionary nature to that, right? Like even if you have a king, right? Like they die at a certain point, right? And then the order needs to be reset, and then you have democracy, which is like, well, we don't want to wait for the king to die. Like we're gonna make it a little bit faster, right? But this idea that there's only the thing coming from below is also wrong. Like because
a ship isn't. A ship needs a navigator. It doesn't get places by just a bunch of oarmen randomly oaring. They need a navigator or a captain at top that's guiding them on where to go. And the captain needs the oarmen to propel the ship. So there's It's what we call love. There's this love between the top and the expression at the bottom, and they work. That's what creation is these two things coming together. The creation of the ship is you have the identity, you have the leader at the top, and the expression at the bottom in the form of the oarsman, and that is what creates a working ship. That's what I think they call it platonic love. You don't even have to call it that. You just call it love. That's what love is.
So I want to add something because I want to bring it back to considerations. I want to be considerate of our topic. And so why is this leader important, right? Like it's doing the relevance realization for the ship, right? It's saying, well, you should be considering this, you should be considering that, and implicitly saying you shouldn't be considering all the other stuff. And that's the most important function, right? Like this is the function of cognition, right? And if we're talking about collective cognition, right, like the role of the leader in collective cognition is to say there's relevant aspects to the world and there's irrelevant aspects to the world. And if we relate to the relevant aspects of the world, right, like even if we're like not identical, right, because we're not, right, we will still start moving in the same direction, right? And you can imagine that, well, like there's several teams, right? And then one team runs into a boulder, right? But they're the front team, right? And everybody thought, well, we should be betting on that team to manifest the right thing. It's like, well, if we're at the boulder, then the next team, which is going slower but at a path that doesn't have boulders on it, will manifest better in the world at a certain point in time, right? And then we can assume that path and then maybe split up again, right? So like the separateness between these organs, effectively, right? Like they're manifesting different things in the world, is something of value, right? Like that's where the evolution can apply itself upon, right? But they need to be walking the same path, right? Else they're not a unity, right? And so when we're talking about whatever, right, like this movement or whatever, right, like when we're talking about a movement, you have this perception of things walking towards the same thing, right? But when we're walking, right, we're walking in a dimension, right? Like so, and it's really hard to see whether people are doing the same thing or whether they're not doing the same thing, right? And my argument is we're not doing the same thing. We're actually being cross purposes in many ways, right? And we were talking about walking in circles, like there's a lot of walking in circles, and the reason why that is happening is because there's no telos, right? And there's no head that sets the telos, right? Mm-hmm. Because there needs to be a relation between the different teams that allows them to maintain a shared identity.
Yeah, and I think look, leadership is a skill. Not everyone can do it. In fact, almost no one can do it, actually. That's actually true. It can't be trained in all people. It can be trained in some people, for sure. There's always plenty of room for improvement in leadership, almost no matter who you are, right? But what the leader does, and maybe only the leader can do, is set what you should be considering and who should consider what. In other words, your role in the structure that you're cooperating in to bring about something bigger than yourself is set by the leader. It's not only set by the leader, but like the leader is supposed to maintain that and decide when it needs to change. And sometimes the leader is going to screw that up because people, as it turns out, are not perfect. Like it's still true. Still sticking by that. That's a hill I'm willing to die on, right? And so you have to have some grace for the leader, and you have to have some grace for the structure, because that's not going to be perfect. And you have to have some grace for everybody in the structure, right? And you can't only have grace for the things that are not properly in the structure, victimized by the structure, disadvantaged by the structure. If you're always focused on the margins, then there is no consideration for the aim. because it's one or the other. Like something gets crushed under the wheels. That happens. It's going to happen. That's why I'm a pragmatist. Pragmatists calculate casualties first. Okay, I know this isn't perfect because I'm not an idealist. Whatever it is not going to be perfect. What's the least amount of damage I can do? And sometimes I get that horribly wrong, for sure. But the alternative is to do nothing. And that is actually the only alternative. Waiting for the magic emergence to just come out of nowhere and be good and do the right thing and manifest correctly is absurd and doesn't work.
And also when the structure grows, right? Like because we're talking about load, right? Like how much can we bear, right? And so when something grows, its capacity to bear things outside of itself will increase. And I think that's the thing that people don't realize often enough, right? Like when you grow, you can be more considerate of other things, right? Like when you're not having to take care of your hunger, like you can spend that energy in ways that are good. And so you first need to get to the place where you're not hungry, and that sucks, right? And there's people going to be left behind, but there's going to be people left behind either way. Like and it's when we were talking about the identifying against, right? Like one of the consequences of identifying against is you're so focused on what you're identifying on that you don't see the things that you're leaving behind, right? You don't see the potential that is not manifest. And it's real easy to say, well, like it's just potential and like it's not guaranteed, and therefore it doesn't count the same way as the thing that's right in front of me, right? And to some extent that is true, right? Like you need to deal with the things that you have and that you can do, and you can't always have a growth mindset. But in other ways, right? Like if you're doing that for too long, then you're going to be stuck at a place that you're stuck at forever, and that's also not okay.
Right. But I want to go back and emphasize, the core issue, which is if you try to save everyone dies. Right. And very much the problem of society right now is that we are trying to accommodate tiny, small in quantity numbers of people by disadvantaging everyone else, right? And so, and that comes from the belief that the 1% is preying on the 99, which is a load of garbage. It's complete and utter nonsense. It's just false. It's as false as a thing can possibly get. Like it is just wrong. Not that doesn't ever happen, but it's not what's actually happening. And when we try to save 10% of the population, right, and give them the world that they want, we destroy the world that the 90% has been successfully living in. I don't think that's a good trade, especially not if maybe those 10% can't be put in a world that's going to give them what they want. Because maybe 10% of the population is crazy and they want things that they can never possibly have, or that if they had them would destroy them. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not making a claim. I'm just saying, have you considered that trying to accommodate a small number of people when a large number of people is quite comfortable might be detrimental to everyone, and everyone might actually lose that game?
Sounds like you're explaining a worldwide pandemic from the last 2 years,
or a movement for rights of a certain group that's less than 10% of the population, or a movement against 1% of the population.
Yeah. Well, I've probably said everything I have that's worth saying, so I'll make room for someone else. Good luck, guys.
Yeah, thanks for being on. People, there's a link in the description so you can hop in and join us. Also, we'd love to have questions in the comment section.
Yeah, it's so nice to have Ethan. Ethan is a very deep thinker, contrary to his own his own instincts. He's quite interesting, and he always has good stuff to say. So it's good to see him in the stream participating. But yeah,
he does a lot of thinking for sure. We get to share it.
Sometimes he does a little too much thinking, but yeah, he knows so much stuff. It's really good. And he read The Republic. Good for him. And he went through my buddy Jack's Ancient Greece Declassified audio thingy there for The Republic. Yeah, it's a podcast. That is correct. Is this actually Boomshroom? Is he actually coming up?
Yeah, sounds like it.
No,
You have
I
a
can't see him on
webcam
camera,
that you can put on and mute your audio before we get destroyed by feedback.
Feedback. Oh, there we go.
Really comfortable.
Oh,
There we go.
yeah, you still have feedback.
There's feedback,
Yeah.
a bunch of noise or something.
Echo. When we talk.
Oh,
Yeah, well, you still owe me a talk, dude.
yeah. Anytime, man. I enjoyed that last one we did. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so you can watch our talk. I'll put it in the comment section.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. I've never really seen somebody kind of do that sort of format. It was cool.
So yeah, what do you want to bring in?
I don't know. I just saw you guys on live and hopped in here 5 minutes ago. What are you guys talking about?
Well, we're talking about being considerate and how that relates to, well, the bigger problems, right? So we were talking about the problem of hierarchy and the problem of political systems and the fears that people have in relation to these things.
I heard Mark talking a little bit about that. You know, the calculus. You know, you got to be really, you know, kind of cold and calculated with things. Otherwise, everybody's going to die. You know, you got to assume these people are going to get crushed under the wheel. How do you mitigate that and make that as few people as possible? I don't know how deep you want to go in talking about all that other lockdown stuff. Probably not a good idea, but yeah, that I think the past 2 years has been a very interesting psychological analysis on humanity.
So you were talking about being rebellious before with me, and maybe you have a real life example of how people being considerate was actually manifesting something inconsiderate in your life, and how you deal with that.
So just everybody that had small businesses in my state, they you know, got shut down, or they had a supply issue. They couldn't get things there on time. There were a lot of mandates, just these arbitrary mandates. You know, people weren't allowed to go out, so barbershops and stuff like that shut down. I had a computer repair shop. I couldn't get parts for months. I had another friend that owned a racetrack. Nobody was coming out for the races anymore. You know, everybody was just kind of locked down for 2 years. And it took after 2 years, it just took its toll on all these small businesses, and it destroyed every one of us. You know, I lost my business. My friends lost their business. We never got any kind of help. Like, you know, they were doling out this government money, this stimulus. I didn't know of any small business that received a stimulus, and I applied to all kinds of things. I mean, I could go on and on. It was just a nightmare. I'm glad it's over. I hope I can set myself up in a position to where I'm not going to be torn apart like that. So that's been a struggle trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what was the appeal of shutting down the businesses? Well, we have to be considerate of their customers. We have to be considerate of the global implications of a pandemic. We have to be considerate of the elderly people, right? We have to be considerate, right? And so there's all these ways in which we were manipulated by consideration of other people. And maybe in ways we shouldn't have, because we were being forced to take responsibility for other people. And look, to some extent, yes, but that can be pushed too far. And it's weaponized compassion, right? That was weaponized compassion. So you have to have compassion for the elderly. You have to consider their point of view and the fact that they're going to be inconvenienced and they could die and all of this stuff, irrespective of how many other people die, right? And again, this is that, what are you considering? Because if all you're considering is the margin, then you're excluding everything else and destroying the world for that group.
Yeah. Yeah, the core of it's the guilt trips that everybody sends each other on. That's the primary steering wheel, if you will, of the whole shebang. You feel bad, Grandma. Oh, what about all these other people? And it's just kind of steering people to behave this way and that way. There's several levers, but the guilt is really the main steering wheel, twisting people all around. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what is guilt, right? Guilt is the movement of attention. What is consideration? That's the movement of attention. Why are you moving somebody else's attention? Do you have good intent when you're doing that? Are you doing it for the good? Or are you moving somebody's attention to manipulate them? Because there are other possibilities other than, well, I'm doing it for their own good. Are you doing it for your own good? Because that's what I'm concerned with. Because again, we don't know what we're up to. Peterson makes this very clear. You don't know what you're up to. You have no idea. That's probably true for most people to an extent that they don't appreciate. And that movement of attention through consideration is a big problem.
And I think what this leads to is first order and second order effects, right? So if I do something in the here and now, it's fairly easy to see the direct implications of my action, right? So when you're like, well, this happened and then this happened, the chain of causality is obvious to everybody. But like when I do something and something happens next week as a consequence of me doing something now, am I gonna ever get credit for that? Like what is the mechanism by which I know I did the right thing, right? And so like there might be no way of returning that credit to that action, right? Like that there might be no way of ever figuring this out, right? So there's a problem there. And then, well, you can see how that when you're in an incentive structure, right? Like, oh, like I have to take responsibility as a leader for my actions, right? Like are you taking responsibility for the perceived implications, right? Like, oh, like there's the statistics, right? Like this is the hospital admissions, right? Like that's a metric and everybody can judge me on that metric. So I'm going to make policy on that metric. Or are you going to judge yourself by the second order effects, right? And at that point, you have no ground to stand up upon, because like there's no way that you can ever justify that in a quantitative manner, right? Like the quantitative measurement to make that up is it's always going to be contested, right? Like there's always more, right? Like, and then you can say, well, like, okay, so what? All the second order effects manifest within the first year, but like, what about the 20 year, right? Like that, like there's always more and more and more. And then we haven't even talked about the spirit, right? Like, so there's a spiritual component, right? Like one of the objections towards wearing masks is that it has implications for the social interactions within society, right? Like, so there's a spiritual component that isn't even understandable in the way that that's going to reverberate into the future, and who knows
Right.
how long.
Yeah, because if as we increase in population, there's like all this disease. Now we have to wear masks permanently or something, or social distance permanently, and then there's going to be this other thing stacked on top of us. Maybe we have to wear sunglasses all the time for some reason because all of the cell phone screens are so bright. We'll go blind. I don't know, but there's just going to be all this stuff added on to us where we're not even going to be like people that see each other anymore. Unless we figure out like what do we do about this? What do you do about disease? What is effective? What is the right thing to do? That's a really important point you made there. What is the right thing to do? There's not a central pillar anymore. There's all these people that are like, oh, this is the right thing. That's the right thing over there. I don't know if it's always been like that. It feels like there's more pull in all kinds of different directions, more pillars that people are gathering around. They're like, oh, my thing's right, your thing's wrong, and it seems just like a crazy minefield of bullshit.
Yeah, I think exactly right. It's the individualism and the sort of splintering of things through identification against, right? I'm not the person that takes the shot. You're the people that doesn't take the shot. That's an identification against, but because that doesn't define something in clear categories, and it can't, then, right, everything splinters. And those people aren't the same people. And they think they're the same people because they know they're not those people, right? But like the reasons, for example, why you wouldn't want to take a shot vary. And so saying everybody who doesn't take the shot is the same doesn't make any sense, because it can't be true, because there's lots of reasons for people not to take a shot, any kind of shot, right? There's lots of the reasons to be against something like that, which is an action in the world with consequences. And there's very few reasons to be for something like that, of that nature. Not everything, but something like that. And so, for example, you can end up in a situation where you say, look, I'm against political power, or I'm against political authority. Well, now you're an anarchist. Congratulations. Welcome to anarchy. Okay. But how are you going to build something in the world? What are you for? Because you don't have a telos. You don't have a purpose. You've just set yourself apart from something with a purpose, right? And for the purpose of identifying yourself, but it cannot ever provide identity. Like me saying I'm an anarchist says nothing about me at all. It just doesn't give you any useful information in the world about my level of interaction, about what I care about what I think, right? It's a single axis of identification that doesn't relate to anything that can be generative or participated with, right? And so like the game A, game B craziness that Jordan Hall was pushing for a while, and other people, right? They just identify against game A. Like they're like, we don't know what the better solution is, but we know what we're doing now doesn't work. Thanks, genius. That's as unhelpful a statement as you could possibly make in the world. And we know there's a better way, and we're just going to label it game B. What if there are 7 better ways? Now what? What does that mean? Like, and this is why when you ask them, game B sounds great. How do I participate? They never have an answer. They do not have an answer. They just say, well, you can't participate with game A if you're going to participate with game B. Oh, fantastic. That's so helpful. Yeah, I'll get right out. I'll get right on that right away. You didn't say anything. You didn't give me a useful frame at all. And
Right,
that's the problem.
And the problem is, right, like if they're gonna give a concrete answer, like is that game B, or is that a concrete answer that's independent of game B, right? It's like why is putting it in the game A, game B framing correct? Because and this, right, like we're talking about framing, right? And it's like, okay, so what is anarchy? Well, I want you to look at me in this way because I find these things important, right? Like that's what you're saying when you introduce yourself in whatever identity, right? Like this is important about me, and so what does it say about you when what is important about you is not something else? like who are you at that point? Like what am I relating to? And so yeah, I think it's really important, right, to look at this reframing and what are we pointing at, right? Because that is when we're in a frame, right? Like in some sense, that is the authority, right? Like because it determines what we see, right? Like it determines our collective participation, right? And so in some sense, changing the frame of the group, right? Like of this conversation is taking leadership. Like it is literally the act of leadership, right? And so that changing can manifest in different ways, right? Like either what my changing the frame is going to conflict with you, right? And now we're going to have to resolve the conflict, or it's producing a pathway towards something else, right? Like towards the manifestation that we want to have as a group. And I think it's really important that when we're having conversations, right? And I think this is related to being in good faith, right? Like when we're having conversations, we want to always invite the spirit that is allowing us to manifest a new thing, right? And we want to have clarity about the relevance, right? Like the things that we need to attend to that are important. And when we're not in that, right? Like now we're effectively bouncing around individuals' necessities, right? Like, oh, I find this important, right? Like I find this important.
Well, what you're talking about is what corporations are doing. And corporations are, doing all these different other things, but, it's a group of individuals trying to achieve a goal, trying to do a bigger thing. Yet, when something that's not politically correct or something that doesn't line up with the mainstream or what the public eye deems acceptable, they all in unison change. They go in that direction. And I wonder, I know that we know there's, manipulation on the television and, just all this rhetoric out there, but really how much of that is under someone's thumb? How much of that is, how much of that can you blame the corporations for? And then how much of that can you blame the individual for not having the willpower to ignore it? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Or is that confusing?
Yeah, I know. I think correct. Right?
So,
hold on a sec. Let me finish. So yeah, I mean, I think that's correct. Like some things are inevitable, right? Like influence and corruption. It's not going to zero. That's not going to happen. Okay. So the fact that it exists is not interesting or important. It is just a fact of the world. All right. You are not bringing it to zero. You're not getting perfect leaders. These things are not happening. And because those things are not happening, the question that you have to ask yourself is how much and when is it too far? And that's the question. Like, when is it too far? Well, that's hard to do. And so people would rather take it to zero. And, so would I, but it's not going to be zero. So then the question is there a puppet master pulling the strings? Like, is there an actual conspiracy? And the answer usually is no. There's usually 7 people with similar enough goals that the next step is something that they want, to enable. And usually that next step is something like crash the economy. Why would you want to crash the economy? Well, let's suppose you're an anarchist. Crashing the economy means bringing down the government. Now, I would argue you're an idiot if you think that, but most people are idiots and they think that, right? Now, if you have hundreds of billions of dollars invested in a scheme that requires the destruction of retail shops because you want to put in a delivery model and take over the retail model where people go to stores, then you also want to crash the economy. Why else would you want to crash the economy? Well, let's suppose you think that free healthcare should be paid for by the government forever for everyone. And you didn't get what you wanted last time. Okay? So you might want to crash the economy because healthcare is affected by the economy, right? Let's suppose instead that you have a dream that if you lived in the Weimar Republic and then into, pre-World War II, that you would be the hero. And that requires crashing the economy. You want to crash the economy. Now, all of these people do not agree on the outcome, right? They don't agree on the ultimate outcome, but they all agree that the economy should crash. And they're all very hopeful that if the economy crashes, they'll get what they want. And so it's a confusion, right? So now it looks like there's one person trying to crash the economy. In fact, there's many groups trying to crash the economy for completely different reasons. And those reasons are not compatible with one another. Like they do not mesh. And they may seem like they do, but they actually don't. And that's the problem, is that, well, now it looks like a conspiracy because a thing happened. And maybe the reason why the thing happened was completely unintentional, because maybe it turns out that when you try to make everybody stay home, and in doing so, you make them, you force them into a situation where they don't buy as much stuff for whatever reason, then the whole economy goes down, right? But it doesn't go away. And the systems that rely on buying things no longer function correctly, and that causes a global supply chain issue that takes 6 to 12 months to manifest and then takes another year or two to work out, actually happens. And then that destroys your delivery business because it turns out you can't get the goods to deliver anymore, and people get pissed off and they go to the store. Why? Because the store has inventory. They weren't counting on a just-in-time delivery system that's enabled by stores with inventory. In other words, the whole Amazon business model actually relies on the retail industry to be almost as big as it is and no smaller, or they can't do what they do because they're taking advantages of inefficiencies in the retail system. And so it's not an option for them to kill the retail system because they rely on it. They're parasitic upon it. And they don't know that. But all these things look like conspiracies, when in fact, a lot of them are just second order effects from stupid decisions.
Yeah, I definitely think there was like a big push to corral people in a desirable direction. Mainly the destruction of small businesses and the inflation of bigger businesses, because when a lot of people lost their business, they had to go work for a big company. So that it just like transmuted that in favor of those people. And maybe that'll change later. That would be great. I don't know. It seems like a pretty big hit to all the people that I know. This year, though, I have seen some people around here that didn't have businesses start one because their last life got nuked by all this stuff, and they want to do something different. So that's a good thing. That's a silver lining I've seen too. But yeah, I just see a lot more people working at home. They're not out. The whole kind of everything has shifted. I guess I'm waiting around for this next big thing to happen, whatever it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to be. Just the thing that's you're not doing this right, or you're not doing that, and you can't work, or you can't run your business. You have to shut your gym down. I don't know. Whatever it's going to be. Maybe it'll be another disease thing, or maybe it'll be something totally different. But there's going to be something, because I think it went really well for the people that wanted to go well.
We'll see. I think there's always repercussions or second order effects of the imposition that people aren't realizing, right? Like, because fool me once, shame on you, right? But fool me twice, and I think we're at the fool me twice stage, and a lot of people are waking up, right? It's like, well, yeah, there was this drama, but was the drama as bad as as we thought it was in the moment, and was it worth all the sacrifice? And people are gonna end up reevaluating. And I actually saw this new development in the Netherlands where they're thinking of making an apology for the actions of the Dutch state during slavery or whatever, on a bunch of points. And then there was a lawsuit by the lobbyists for the apology to stop the apology because they didn't think it went far enough. And it's even more funny because they just got flat out denied and says no, the legal system has has no influence here because it's not an obligation of the state to make this apology. There's nothing saying that the state has to do this, right? It's a voluntary action. But the fact that they want to do the thing, that they want to stop the thing that they're intending to have happen is so amazing to me, right? Like the lack of gratitude within that is just insane. It's just insane. And at that point, right, from my perspective, look, you're no longer a good actor. Like you're not going to be grateful for the thing that you're getting while you're not, you don't have right to it, right? Like this is what the judge literally said. There's no reason for the state to do this, which is actually a reason maybe not to do it, but that's a different point, right? Like this.
Yeah, nobody thinks of slave drivers over in the Netherlands. I've never thought that.
Right, but it turns out that actually most of the slaves were
it was like a hub, a slave hub, huh? Okay, I didn't know that.
Well, no, because they're the shipping. They were always shipping magnates. Greece and the Netherlands, the two big shipping empires.
And Portugal, I think Portugal started it.
Portugal was for a while. Yeah, well, look, Spain and Portugal started all the bad things. That's true. But actually, most of the slaves were transported on Dutch ships. I think that's pretty well established. But the thing is that, look, there's a way in which they're redirecting the consideration, right, towards redirecting the attention towards this one issue. And it's invalid because this one issue is wrapped up in a history that may or may not be portrayed accurately. And also, what do you do about past events? How do you take responsibility for something that you didn't do?
Or present events, because, why should you apologize for slavery while there's still slavery going on everywhere? Let's fix that. How about we all fucked up? All humans are really shitty to each other in the past. There's still some that are shitty now. They haven't got the memo that we're not doing that as a species anymore. We're trying to be cool. We'll build you a water line and some like tents and show you how to farm or whatever we got to do. Everybody's trying to do the better thing here. And there's some people that don't know that. And maybe we should help remind them in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. We could all get behind that instead of the apology tour, like this useless apology tour that really, I mean, there's people dying out there, man. Child trafficking, you name it, blah, blah, blah. That's a problem we can tackle. It's not like an impossible thing. It's probably easier than going to the moon, right? I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
Well, that is actually a good question. Is that easier than going to the moon? Because it might not be. like we were talking about having these large systems operate, and like at some level it's a miracle, right? Like there's a ton of incompetent, unmotivated people that are working in a structure, and like it still kind of does something.
Yeah. Well, that's because people love someone. You know, that's the whole reason any of this works. That somebody rolls out of bed in the morning and makes sure the power grid's working and your air conditioning's operating, the plumbing is flowing, because you know that they love somebody or they have a family that they love and they want to take care of. And now, as we know, this meaning crisis, that's in jeopardy. People in the next 20 years aren't going to have that. So are we going to have lights in cars and stuff? I don't know. Maybe on a limited scale.
Well, you know, and also, do they love just someone or do they love something? Like, do they have a higher ideal that they're enacting by getting up at 5 a.m. and making sure the water's flowing, or getting up at 4 in the morning or working an overnight shift to make sure the electricity stays on? Like, maybe they have a love of something higher than just the people in the family around them, because maybe they're not staunch individualists, right? Maybe they understand they're embedded in something much bigger than themselves that's much more important than their discomfort at 3 a.m. when they have to take care of these things. Like, that's what I think.
Yeah.
We're giving up to a higher purpose, to a higher purpose.
Yeah. That's a lot of love there, man. Yeah, that's a lot of love for people. And if you don't have that, yeah, we don't have this conversation, the internet, all this other cool stuff that we got. But anyway, I gotta hop off here. I just saw you guys. I want to jump in. I see you on here again. I'll stop by. But thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I love to have you, dude.
Yep. See you guys. Have a good talk.
So yeah, thanks for participating. Everybody else who wants to participate, please hop in or participate through the chat with us. And yeah, like there's this thing, right? Like I'm gonna connect this zero casualty delusion to this idea of measuring things, right? And like the thing that we're judged upon is the measurement, right? Like that's the thing that, well, that we can be held to account for, because the rest is ineffable. And yeah, right. So we're gonna make the rules that optimize for the things that we can optimize for. And then there's also the buying off of guilt or responsibility with just over regulating things so that things can never be brought back to you, right? Like this is one of the problems I have with the legal system in the US, right? Like if you can sue everybody for everything and everybody needs to defend themselves against the possibility, right? Like there's a lot of load that comes with that. And
Right.
then in the Netherlands, like they have something similar, right? But they don't have to protect themselves legally, but now they have to protect themselves against the insurance companies, right? Because they have to
Yeah.
justify why they're doing the things they do in the way that they're doing them. It's like, well, like why is the insurance company deciding what a doctor is doing and whether that's correct or not?
Right. Right. Well, and the biggest problem with the zero casualty delusion is that what you're doing by trying to optimize to 0 or for 0 is you are not optimizing, because that's not optimization, right? That's cutting things off, right? That's 0 is a weird number, right? A strange number, as Peterson says. And you are giving up or relinquishing your responsibility to discern. Right? You're saying, I don't want to make a decision between the 80% and the 20%. I don't want to make a decision between harming 1% of the people and harming 99% of the people. I'd rather not do that. And that's what you're doing. You're trying to avoid discernment, trying to avoid judgment. You're trying to avoid making a decision. That's why, to loop it back to tolerance is dangerous, right? Because if you're just too tolerant, you're just avoiding making a decision. You're being a lazy, irresponsible person. And look, fair enough. We all get lazy and irresponsible. But when that's your ethos, when you're just trying to avoid personal responsibility, when trying to avoid harm, right? All you do is stagnate yourself into inaction. And when you're trying to get people to act in the world in a way that can't cause harm to other people, you are paralyzing them, right? Or setting them up for failure. And I don't like either of those options, right? And you're still cutting them off from grace and redemption, right? All of those problems are still there. So this claim, this guilt claim of being inconsiderate is a cudgel that you use against your enemies to avoid your own responsibility for being a decent human being. All right. And again, are you giving the same consideration to the alleged perpetrator as you are to the victim? And are you sure you're right about what happened? Right? The number of times I get people saying, you were mean to that person. And I ask them and they're like, no, I didn't think you were mean at all. That was your judgment, not theirs in the moment, right? Like that. In other words, the thing you think happened didn't happen. Worth considering. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what your what your ethos is and why you have that desire to use that cudgel. But it is a cudgel.
So I listened to this this podcast from Tom Holland called The Maid of Holland, and he was talking about the Dutch ethos and how we were effectively we're trying to reclaim land from the water, right? Which is literally a biblical thing, right? Like making order out of chaos. And then there was this thing about city walls, right? Like so that there's this walling thing, and then there was this Protestant movement that was trying to wall itself off from the Catholic imposition manifested through the Spaniards that were taking over the Netherlands. And so he was going through all of this, right? And what is it? Well, like we can have this skin, right? Like we can have this garment of skin that protects us, right? And he eventually, and you should listen to this podcast because it's full of symbolism and it's awesome. But he eventually came into, well, we're trying to organize the house that we're living in neatly, and the role of the Dutch maid is, in some sense, she's protecting the house from entropy, which was something ridiculous during that time, because like why would you clean the streets in front of your house, right? Like why would you take responsibility for that stuff? And the point was that is how you gain purity, right? Like that's how you keep yourself pure in the eyes of God, right? And so there was a measurement of defense, but the defense was manifested in the spiritual, right? Like it is in keeping the right house, you have the right ground for being the right person, right? Like your personality evolves as a consequence of what you're manifesting in the world. And Paul van der Klee is going to love this, right? Because this is all based on Calvinist theology, right? And yeah, there's this element in this purity that that is like it is taken to the material, and he was also making this distinction, right? Like so during that time, which was the introduction of the golden age in the Netherlands, right? You get this focus to material gains and material manifestations that is hyper in a real way, right? Like there were things possible that weren't possible before, right? And so there was a temptation connected to that option, and yeah, right, like you need to resist that temptation, but you can't ignore it, right? Because there's a whole bunch of potential in there, right? So like that is navigating well, like in some sense, and like we're gonna have to connect this back to affluence, right? Because I think I think affluence is the thing that allows you to be considerate. Like it is actually that which allows you to do other things, and we're taking this for granted. Like we're taking this for granted that we can like just get everybody on board of the ark, right? Like Noah didn't take everybody on board of the ark, right? Like he only took his family. And if he was considerate of all the rest of the people, like like yeah, that did not happen, right? And yeah, so that's a hard question to ask yourself, and that's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, and that's where we fail with consideration. It's like, where does it begin and end? That's the relevance realization again. What is the proper level of engagement with consideration as such? What is the way in which we should be considerate of others? Welcome.
Thank you very much. Interesting. Like I just listened in. I'm from Denmark, by the way. 22-year-old. Just found you guys stream randomly. I tend to go on YouTube, just search up StreamYards and see who's live sometimes when I'm bored. But hope you guys have a good Friday, and seems very interesting.
Yeah. Do you have a question? Like
I don't know. I just love to be maybe a part of the dissertation. I'm a Christian man myself, and a young believer, I will say, and just would like to hear your opinion, how you believe, and what we could learn from each other. Like I'm a learner and a believer. You know what I mean?
Well, what we believe in is doing this, right? Like getting out the message to have people change the way that they're understanding things, because
of course,
that's the first step, right? Like if
I think the first step is to learn yourself before you teach others. Because like what I mean, like when I go to school, I hated that shit because my teacher, he just had the arc and she had to get to all the same classmates, and we all had to do the same thing, and she already knew the answers, so she was not really learning anything. If you want to say to your kid, don't sit on your phone all day, you probably have to do the same as a parent. So I really get it, but like I just hope we guys can, like, you guys learn yourself before you teach other, because I'm not saying you're hating or anything, because hate spreading very fast, hate speech and all that, and you're just trying to do good, but I'm also saying good things can also turn bad. So never put whatever other beliefs or whatever, like on other people if you haven't learned yourself. I respect all religions and I love all people. I try to understand. It's again, understanding is a misunderstanding, basically. If there's something you don't like, or if it's something you don't understand, it's very easy to say I like, I don't like. No, it's very easy to say I hate instead of saying I like or I don't like. But if you don't hate and actually try to understand, you will say I like it or maybe I don't like it, and that's fine. That's all I'm gonna say like that. But,
so do you have an experience with consideration and how that can be inconsiderate? Because that's the struggle that we're trying to dance around.
I think it's really about it's again like like, you know, we can all be angry, we can all be mad. And I don't like to look at the world black and white. That's what I mean, like, and we should all be teachers, we should all be students, you know, under God. But like, it's very, I don't know like what to say there actually, but like, maybe I misunderstood a little bit, but like, yeah.
Well, so what we're trying to figure out, right, is this idea of consideration. And
It's trying to figure something out, but like,
yeah.
that sounds very deep questions, and it's a deep question to figure out. Like, I don't think I could figure that out. Like, I would love to say my beliefs.
Part of
beliefs
figuring
and
out
opinions,
is looking at something long enough, right? Like if you look at something long enough,
you'll find it.
Well,
it's like following the white web.
You don't necessarily have to find it, but you'll find a way to relate to it, right?
Okay.
You find a way that's like, oh yes, that's how I deal with it, right? And then you don't really know it, but you know enough to have a good relation to it, right? Like that you're not misusing it. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this consideration, right? Because we're identifying that this being considerate is being misused, right? Like it's being misapplied in life, right? Because initially the first thing that comes up when you say, well, oh yeah, I'm being considerate of you, right? Like that seems like a good, right? Like being considerate is a good, but there's ways in which that being considerate is actually doing the opposite in some sense, right? Like it's drawing away the attention from the good, and it's actually more a manifestation of
it's like energy. I would say, like, I think it's all coming to energy, if that's what you want me to answer, because it's all energy, you know. I can give you bad vibes, you can give me good vibes, you know what I mean? But it's not gonna go both ways always. And that's something I think was really interesting, like energy, human energy, because we share so much energy and we take so much energy, but we don't really seem to understand how much damage we're doing to this with all this internet, with these computers. You know, like they do microwaves to your brain all the time.
So
it's like putting your brain in a microwave. Because I'm young and I'm born into it, you know. I didn't choose this. I would have wanted to just get my own farm, my own family, my own food and water and so on, and just live the simple, easy life, hard life, but still life is simple.
You don't think you can do that?
I don't know. I haven't tried it, to be quite honest, but it's my dream.
But why haven't you tried it?
It's cold in Denmark, so like there's no homeless over here, so it's to just start up a whole year project, like actually buying a land and starting up building, or maybe a old farm. Denmark is small.
You don't have to own the land. You can just rent from someone else.
Very small, but like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I've always been independent. I never worked for anybody. I've been.
Why not? You don't think there's good people to work for?
Absolutely. And I work for my family and my friends and so on. But you mean what I mean, or you know what I mean, like working for a company or just doing some boring
you were talking about a farm, right?
Yeah, like independency, being more independent. And that's something you have to build up day from day to learn.
Why do you want to be independent?
To be free. Basically, to do free whatever I want, free from the system, from the government, from the whatever they want to push on my neck. You know what I mean?
What is Christian about that?
What is Christian about what?
That?
About being independent. I don't talk about religion really about that. Like, I think we're all free, or we should be free to believe and to live as we want, what we feel safe and good with for our family and ourselves. But like, you can be happy, go in the bank and rent 10 million to a house, and then you have to pay that back in the next 10 years. But instead, I go and build my own house in 1 year, and I can have fun the next 9 years with that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, you can make things more simple, more easy. Life is pretty simple. But if you wanna go through whatever, and you have to, kind of like, if you born, like I'm saying, like I'm born into this system, I have things to pay and do and so on. but I wish I was just like free to make my own food, and I didn't have rules about like how much I could make and how
Why
much.
aren't you free to do all that? Like people do that
You
all the time.
you are, but
Why
not really,
do it?
because like you can't just go out of the system. You still have to work for them. You have
Oh,
still
people
have
do
to
it all
pay
the time.
taxes
You,
and
yeah,
so on.
you absolutely can. People do it all the time. You should join.
Of course, and yeah, I should, and again, you should join yourself. Like you can't just join a club and say, oh, now I'm gonna be independent and I'm gonna learn all about that. Like that's something that takes day
like
from
those
day, you
clubs
know.
exist. Like those
You
clubs
got,
actually exist.
Yeah, but
of course,
but
but I don't
if
think
you
that's a
can't,
good
if
thing
you
because we're all
can't,
different.
you
Of
can't.
course.
Like if it's not an option, it's not an option. But
Yeah.
you can. You should
Okay.
do that, right? You
I
wouldn't
should,
have
I
internet.
should.
You wouldn't have a computer because you can't build that by yourself. But you know, if you're privileging being free from the government and all this, then you should go that way. There's nothing.
And again, that sounds pretty boxed, but like, yeah, you're right, and it is again my choice. It's me who have to choose what I want to do with my life, where I want to go, and so on. What my goals is. Right now, I really just want to explore. I want to try to get experience and share experience. I'm a YouTuber myself, where I go around in Denmark, live stream outside in real life, and just share and get experience. But when I'm actually getting older, like when I actually get my own family and so on, I will wish for my kids to not be in the same as me, like playing video games all day or being on the internet. So like, you know what I mean? Like the basic things today.
But
I really want my.
why don't
Okay.
you stop the things that you think are bad?
Because I'm not doing it the same. Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I'm not doing that right now.
But then why are you complaining about the things that you can?
I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you where my goals are. Okay, that's not complaining, brother.
Okay, why aren't you working towards your goals?
I am every day. I'm learning to make my own soup. I'm growing. I go to I have my own garden where I grow a lot of vegetables. It's very cold right now in Denmark. It's like snowy, like this much snow. Terrible, but I have plants inside. You can see here. Plant over there, lemon tree, and I have a olive tree over there. I got many plants. I have in my garden. I have like 20 big olive trees. 10 years old. I've been growing a long time, and I've been in gardening school a lot in a border school. 5 months ago, I was on a border school where we had a lot of gardening classes too, and so on. But I really have an interest in Mother Earth, in Earth actually, living Earth. I love working with that. I would love to grow my own food because you can do everything yourself, like I'm telling you, in your own way, of course. And of course, we can't leave the system. And it's really nice to know there's a backup, like a hospital you can go to. If you go like out in the woods, like a caveman and live there, that's not really safe. But you know what I mean? Like I just want to be more independent. And I think we're going the opposite way, most people.
What is the reason that you want to be independent?
Because I feel sick. I've been feeling sick in a long time. As a young man, I haven't, of course, taken the best choices, but still, I feel it's a very unhealthy way of living. This way, I'm living, at least in Denmark, and my friends and so like. People can buy alcohol when they're 16. I'm alcoholic now. I drink every day. I smoke weed every day. I even do drugs sometimes and shit. Like that's not me, you know. But it's again, it's a big escape, you know. It's a big chaos in my life, but it's something I wanna fix, of course, and something I'm trying to fix every day and work on. But it's only myself who can help myself. Of course, there's tools.
What is the problem? Is the things that you do in the system the problem, or the system?
I just don't feel good with like. I really want to be independent, like make my own things, my own food, my own closet, my own house, my everything, you know, and get my own land. But like, it's not possible here. And it's something you have to build up to be independent. Like first of all, you have to, of course, have a sum of money to actually say to the system, I'm going on pension now, and you can screw me, and I will live on this and this money every month, you know. It's a pension. Like, you can do that. Like in Denmark, I think it's like you need maybe 6 million crowns. That's around $1 million. And then you can go on pension. And of course, you can just do whatever you want. And yeah, if you go, and of course, you don't get paid a lot, and you can't use a lot. That's where you don't want to go. Like make your own things and so on. I don't know. Like, is it totally crazy what I'm saying, or if I'm new for you, or like, what do you
No,
guys?
I've heard this story many times before. Like it's
Okay, fair enough.
but
Yeah, it's
And
a
again,
struggle
maybe
it's a struggle of trade-offs, right? There are a bunch of trade-offs. You can go build your own house. You can't have internet, you can't have electricity, you can't have a hospital, but you can build your own house, right? But you're trading off a bunch of stuff, and yeah, you don't want the trade-off. Well, I don't blame you. It sounds like a bad deal. So
The
maybe
trade-off
the
is
inevitable, right?
okay. You think that? But
no,
that's
I know.
it depends on what kind of house you want. Like I can build my own house with old shit, and of course that's not gonna hold the
Yeah,
next
but
storm.
then you'll have a
But
shitty
like,
house, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's a
again,
trade-off. So
that's
you're
not.
not
But I'm just
having
saying
a
I
nice.
don't want to manage. I'll better go build my own house in 1 year for the money I actually saved up for. Then go to the bank and say I want a house and a stupid car and a stupid dog and some stupid kids, so I can feel happy for that little period of time. And it's not gonna work out. Then I have to work a lot. I'll better just work for myself and build my own house. You know what I mean?
I don't know why you're not doing that. Like you could do that. You just have to give up being online and
Yeah.
drinking and all this other stuff.
Absolutely. And you're totally right. I'm not like telling you.
That sounds good. Like you should go do that.
Like yeah, I should, and I'm going there, but like it's it's again my own problem, and it's myself who's standing in front of there, like in front of myself. I'm the wall, but so you guys are really like fucking Einstein. It's like holy moly, and you're bald also. Or you almost bald, but for real, you guys are really smart. Like I really respect you, but I feel there's a little bit of like we don't know each other, but you seem a little bit like judgmental. Maybe I don't know. You're not pointing fingers. I like that.
No,
But
like we're trying to help you figure
I
out
am
what you want, right?
I will really respect
and
that.
so if you're saying something and you're not doing it, right? Like there's a problem there, right? Like either
You
what
think
you're
so?
saying is incorrect or what you're doing is incorrect,
Okay.
and you need to fix one of those.
That's interesting. Because maybe I just go on telling myself a lot of things, and yeah, like you say, nothing happened, but that's not really the thing. Like I really like you don't know me. Like I just got my own apartment 2 months ago. Got from my mom's fucking almost basement or mom's room, and I feel something is happening and so on, but I still feel lost in a way, and I need a direction to go. I need a more goal. Of course, these are big goals, like getting your own place, getting your own family. I know that's in the long future, but why now? Like I really
I think you should
have to figure out better things, of course, like school and work and.
Yeah, I think you should take small.
I'm not
goals,
happy,
right?
Yeah.
When you do small goals, right? You actually get the satisfaction of reaching your goal, right?
Yeah,
and that's really important, right? But you also learn, right? You learn by doing, right? Like I was gonna suggest at the start, since you were suggesting, well, I don't want to work on a farm. You can just work on a biological farm or something, right? Like there's plenty of places where they'd be happy to have you. Like
there's farming schools and all
space.
that. I know that you're totally right, man. But farming in Denmark and actually having your own
But you
farm
don't
for
have
your
to do it
own
in Denmark.
sake is different, because all farming in Denmark, it's not like big in America where we have millions of cows in one farm, but we still have like they're in cages, and the same for all animals.
As well.
It's not what I want. I want like
other farms as well. There's farms that do it correctly, and if Denmark is actually as horrible as you say, you just come over here in the
Netherlands. I didn't say it was horrible,
there's
but
definitely farms here that do it correctly.
Okay. Where are you guys at, by the way?
I'm in the Netherlands, and I know that there's definitely farmers here that aren't doing the things that you say that farmers do.
It's the same over here. But you know what I mean? Like it's all they make it like it's not like there's maybe 2 persons in Denmark who still live on the old farming ways, where they have no machines, just horses and cows and so on. So they don't live that way. They have to make money.
Oh, go work for
Very
them.
few people do it for themselves, and
Go-
they're very poor, but they can still
Go
live.
work for them. Like
But work for
farms are
who?
real cool
They
places
can't.
to
They
work.
can't hire me. They can't hire me, and I want my own farm. I want my own family. Why should I? Of
You gotta
course I
take
should.
small
Like I'm
steps.
young, but
You
I
gotta-
know what you mean.
Yeah,
But like,
you gotta start small. You can't, right? First you work
Of
for
course.
somebody so that you figure
True.
out how to run a farm, right?
True.
And then you get
True.
more jobs.
True. That's a good
Figure out
idea, at
more
least,
how to
if
run.
you wanna learn some tricks. Yeah, true. Very true. And you both from Netherlands, or what about
No,
you?
I'm from the United States,
Oh, okay, fine. Can I ask which state, or like South
South Carolina.
South Carolina? Yeah. It's like the chili. It's the only thing that pops to my head when you say that. A chili. South Carolina. Seems very hot. Is it warm over
usually
there?
is.
Or
It's winter right now. It's a little cooler than I'd like, but normally it's quite
little
warm.
bit cool. We have like that much snow outside. It's terrible every time.
No snow here.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
We've got farms.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these big decisions, right? Like working somewhere, right? Like you don't have to go for a whole year, right? You can just try out for a week or a month, right? Like
True.
you can just call them on the phone.
Experience is
say,
better
like,
than no experience. Like it's better to try things out. Like that's really what you got to do most of the
right,
times in
and I
life.
bet they'd be happy to have you.
Yeah. I'm just I have my problems, and it's my own problems, and I can only fix them. Like I have my addictions and shit that makes me not available to work when you drink all day and smoke.
Yeah.
And all that shit.
Well,
So-
maybe that's what structures and societies can help you with too, right? Is
Of course.
maybe not living
Some
on
of
your own is better if you're an addict, because if you're an addict, you'll just
I go to counseling meetings with a woman, just 1-to-1 every week, and I was there for 15 times, but I didn't do the homework she gave me, to be honest. And last time I was there, she told me we had to stop it, and I had to call her after New Year. She told me, but yeah. And since that, it's been going really bad. I did cocaine almost every day. I just stopped like 3 days ago or something, and thought about it today, also buying some more, and I'm really broke, and it's terrible. I'm just alone, like I just come from my mom's place. My brother is in jail, so I took over his apartment. To be quite honest, yeah.
Didn't you
chaos.
open up with that you're a Christian?
Yeah, I am.
Like,
That's
are you going to church?
I don't, not that often. I of course do to some extent, but I don't go there every Sunday. I think believe is something you should do for yourself if you want to share it, or you want to listen to a priest or whatever. What do they called in other religions? I don't even know. Like, but like that's something you should only do for yourself in the start. Like that's your belief. That's something you should die for, because that's what they want to take away from you. That's your freedom to believe. And I think everybody should believe it. If I ask other people in my age today, what do you believe in? They say, I believe in nothing. I say, what is nothing? What is nothing? You cannot explain me that either. It doesn't have to be a God. It doesn't have to be Jesus or Allah or Muhammad, whatever, or Buddha. It's up to you. It's about you believing in yourself and your family and whatever else over you. There's always something over you. But yeah.
Do you think that in the church there's a bunch of people trying to be good, and they struggled? Well, let me finish. And they struggle with similar issues like you, and they have experience with that, and that they actually could be there for you in a way that the therapist cannot?
The church.
Yeah.
Of course. In some churches, I would say the problem with Danish churches is they should be public to everybody, okay?
No. I'm asking you a question, right?
Okay, sorry.
If you think they could be there for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why don't you make use of that?
Why don't I? I do actually. I thought about it at least, and I actually did talk to priestess like not that long time ago, maybe 6 years ago. And again, like I just don't think this is different from a priest and my dad. I think it would be better to go to my family than a priest. Listen, priests in Denmark, they are signing up doing the holy whatever, you know, to say I'm gonna work for the church and the people. No, listen, you have to.
Yeah,
you have
I
to
know.
understand it.
I know what you.
And
what
they
you're gonna
don't.
say,
They don't.
right?
They fucking lie and they go and do satanic
Okay.
rituals with the Freemasons.
I
Rituals
agree
outside
that
of
there's
the
some individuals,
public.
like there's some
Disgusting.
individuals that might be doing that, right?
Yes.
But there's also individuals that aren't doing that and are actually
True.
helping. And
But they
so
are all sold. They all get a paycheck. I don't believe in paychecks, man. When you get your first
but,
paycheck,
like,
your mind will only be in the
let me
paycheck.
finish the point.
Sorry.
So if you want help, right?
Yes.
I'm like,
yes. Help?
even
No,
people-
I have to help myself.
No, even
I can
people-
choose. I can put this out in my beer, and I can not drink the beer, and I cannot smoke my joint. You know what I mean? I can throw all my money out of the window. No money for coke also. Fuck it, you know.
Can you let me finish?
Sorry. Yes, of course.
Okay. So even the people, right, who get paid, right, like can do good things. Like getting paid doesn't make you do bad things, right?
True. True.
And you don't have to talk to priests, right? Like there's also people in churches.
That's
right?
why I'm here to talk to you guys.
Right. And I'm trying to say that there's people like me in the real world, right, that you can get into contact with.
Okay.
Like I want to help you, right? Like we're on Discord, we're doing meditation every day, we're having
Great.
talks every day, we're trying to do this stuff online. So like subscribe to the channel, everything, right? Like come on to the Discord. I'll give you a link. But there's an important aspect, right? Like I cannot knock on your door and check in how you do it. Right? So if you go on a Coke band or whatever, like I cannot support you. Like that's not an option for me.
What do you mean? Like, if I'm what do you mean?
Well, if you're off, right? Like whatever, right? Because you lost your discipline, right? Like you
No, of course. I respect your stream and your house or Discord server or whatever, and your rules, of course.
No, that's not what I
Okay.
said, right? Like
Okay.
in life, right? Like you're talking about self-control and dealing with addiction, right? And when you're an addict, right? Like there's times when things go better, and then there's times when things go worse, right?
That's life. We all are addicted, I
Right.
guess, to some extent. Yeah.
Well, so in some ways, yes.
No, we have patterns. We can change patterns. We cannot remove patterns. We all eat, sleep, and so on. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's important, right? Like when we can't do the right thing, when we have people around us that help us do the right thing, right?
Yes,
and they can
yes.
physically be there with us to help us through things, right? Like that's really important. And,
Okay.
And so what is important for you is to find these people in your life, right?
Okay. Okay.
And listen to them, right? Because
of course, I'm a really good listener. I know you don't feel that right now.
Until the moment that you're not, because you're whatever, you're not feeling well, right? And then you're not a good listener. And everybody has that as well, right? And so
I guess
what needs to happen, right? Like you're talking about all of these patterns, right? Like there's these negative patterns that build up. And
I don't believe in negative and minus and plus and black and white. I think we all born under the same star.
There are patterns, right? Like going to school that allow you to go.
That's the school making that system,
listen,
not me.
Let me finish.
That's not my system. You know what I mean?
Listen, there is a pattern, right? Like learning, right? Like I'll just leave it out of school. It's just
my
learning.
name, my classroom, A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3.
Right. When you learn, it allows you to go towards your goal, right? Because you need to learn certain things in order to get your farm. Right? Like that's just necessary.
Okay.
So learning is a good pattern, right?
Absolutely.
So if you are among people, right, who have good patterns, you will be able to do more good patterns because you'll cooperate with them.
Yeah.
And that's what you need. You need to be among people.
So what you're saying is like I'm a loser, so I should stop being with losers because that makes me a bigger loser. I should start being with rich people so I can become rich. Nah, but I
No,
heard that a
not
lot,
rich people.
and yeah,
No,
like, but
not
listen,
rich people.
to
Good
to
people.
say
Good
fair
people.
kids play best with fair kids or whatever, you know, like that's a school. I think we can all learn from each other, and everybody have a word, everybody have a meaning, everybody have a belief,
Yes,
and a
everybody
choice,
has everything, but
and a
does
choice.
does the thing allow you to get out of the situation that you don't like or not?
At times it does, but at times it not in the long run maybe. But that's again my choice,
Yeah.
brother, not somebody else, and I shouldn't find out.
Well,
Like, listen,
if
I
your
should
choice is
find
I don't want to
love,
be
I should
helped,
find
that is
friendship,
fine.
and so on. Of course, yes, but I don't need a psychology like or something right now. Maybe I do, but like, you know what I mean. Like, you can't. You're not a doctor either, so you or like whatever. So you can't tell me I need to find better people because you don't know who I know. You don't know the people I know. I don't know you either.
Yeah,
You
but you
seem
always
very
need to
like,
find better people.
yeah,
Like
but you
that's
seem
always
very just like you're pointing a lot of fingers at me, bro, and it all points back to you. Like, it seems there's something wrong with your head a little bit. Okay, that sounds retarded, but like, I'm sorry, but like, but like for real,
no,
it
I
just seemed
think
like
what
you
you're
want to get
doing is you're
independent,
trying to
and I,
distract from facing the thing that's obvious.
okay,
That's what I think is happening.
that is how too maybe. Because you're white and I want to see straight sometimes, and it's hard, you know. It can all be illusions at times. It can all be looking weird, and then the next or good. Like, my dreams can be your nightmare, and that's also the thing you have to understand. My energy is a whole nother than yours.
Yeah,
So just stop talking about me, Manuel.
I
Yeah.
will stop talking about you.
We
but
talk about
I
us.
I
Let Mark
I
talk for
I
one
just
time.
I
I'm
just wanted
getting too retarded. I'm sorry, yeah, but I
I
will
just wanted
respect
to
you
give
guys.
this message, right? And you
Yeah,
think about it, right? Like
yes, I will.
and you have a responsibility towards yourself to
I do, absolutely,
do the best for
absolutely.
yourself.
Fuck yeah. Yes. God bless you guys. Can I be here still when you talk? Can I
Yeah,
just?
sure.
I have
You
to
can
go
be
on
here.
my fridge, get another beer. Yes, 1 second.
Okay.
Is it okay? Is it
No,
okay I
it's
drink
okay.
in here? Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
my
That's
sins.
you've
My
already been
sins.
drinking, so it's
My
not too late for
sins.
that.
It's apple juice.
Yeah. So maybe we want to start getting some conclusions, right? So considerations, right? Like we're considerate about things in the world, right? Like so
Like,
one
considering a
way
lot
of
of things.
well, I want to like go back to what we were talking about. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So
I got pee then.
okay,
Toilet.
okay. Have a good tea. So one thing that we want to do is we want to be considerate about the things in the world, right? Like what are the things that we have to consider to, well, like we were talking about in the conversation, to plot our course in life, right? Like that is a way to be considerate about things in the world, and then we have to find a way for ourselves to realize which things are relevant, right? Like which things are words of consideration and which things are not worth consideration, right? And if we have a way that we're we're making things that are relevant to us, right, irrelevant, right, we're being inconsiderate towards the future, towards the path, like our final goal, right? Like we want to manifest this aim that we're having in the world. So we need to have that discernment, right? And that's a hard path, right? Like, and I think that's why we're having these talks. We're having these talks to figure out like what is the way that we can start discerning what do we need to consider and what don't we consider. What do we need to consider in ourselves? What do we need to consider in others? Like what is important, right? And Yeah, Mark, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I think the problem with consideration is exactly that. It's one thing to say, "Oh, have you considered?" Right? It's another thing to put your preferences on another person and use consideration as an excuse, right? So I know the example that was used earlier today was, vanilla versus chocolate ice cream. Well, what about mint chip? Right? It's like, well, except that. Why is that your three things? Right? Why isn't it the 108 flavors or whatever? And that's, all you're doing is imposing your preferences on another person and calling it consideration, right? And that's a way in which you're not being considerate, even though you appear to be, because you're conflating the consideration, the decision, with the act of being kind to a person, which is a different thing. It's just a conflation in the language, and people are very confused about that.
I just saw your first video. You said, "Hello and welcome." Why you don't talk like that anymore?
I do still talk like that.
Just feel it's so weird.
He's been learning.
I love to stalking like videos or like channels. It's just interesting how people grow. You look the same, but like how we grow in time. We all just kind of eat ourselves every day, in a sense, like our own flesh, our own bacteria and micro, so on. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we change over time for sure, and we develop
all the fucking time, man. And I just love how opinions and discussions can change from second to second, from one sentence or one vibration or whatever, a sound maybe even, It's kind of like a hypnotizing.
You're actually talking to two people who hardly do that.
Okay.
Like I hardly change my opinion about things.
No, again, like you say, old dog cannot learn, and that's not true.
No,
and
that's
of course,
not
again, you guys are older than me at least, and you probably have built a stronger opinion in most things than me. So I'm like, but I think it's very important to be open, and you guys seem open. That's all I want to say. Like,
yes, we're open in some ways, but we're closed in others, right? And
but
that's,
you want to still learn.
Yeah, and
see,
there's a line there, right? And there's a dance there, right? Like there's a way in which you can navigate that, and there's a way that well, when you're dancing, right? Like some people can dance and they're always out of balance, right? And then there's other people that can dance and they have sure footing.
You should see me dance. I'm a good dancer, but like
Well, and that's what we end up like. If you can live life with while dancing, not getting out of balance, not falling over, right? Like that's the place that you want to get to, right? Like that's the place where you can be confident in your
life. I make it simpler and simpler, but it's just my words because you guys are very big brain for me sometimes. It's just like the words. Like I'm not English speaking official. Like I speak Danish, and I just started learning English 3 years ago, and now I speak 7 other languages too. I speak different languages every day.
So
it's kind of messed up.
So Andy, I'm gonna leave you with an invite to Discord that we hang out.
Yeah, I have a Discord. I have many servers myself, but I'd love to join you guys. Yes.
Yeah. So or I'll just post my ID in the in the section here, and then we'll meet up because it's
okay.
Since we're both in Europe, right? Like at least I'm gonna have to.
Not really neighbors, but like Denmark and Canada is neighbors now, sharing borders, or we don't even. So
here, like I put it in a private chat. Like I want to give the opportunity for the people in the comment section to have a last say. I think we kind of have.
No, you're good.
Been
you're good.
Considerate enough of what considerations are.
Oh shit!
Oh, there we go.
I think it was too little. because of me, of course.
No.
Breaking in, but I hope you got what you needed for that video. I was
Yeah,
really,
no,
I'm
we've
really
been going
happy
for 3
to
hours,
be
dude. We've been going a long time, and it's time for
there.
us
Okay.
to
Yeah.
bring chickens.
Yeah, 3 hours. Holy moly!
Yeah.
I didn't know that. 3 hours.
So you can watch it all back and see all
Yeah.
what we did. And so yeah,
Yes,
thanks
I
for
will.
hopping in, and I hope
Thank you.
you'll engage on the Discord, right? And
I will. Send me a link in there, and I will.
Okay.
To the
See you
server.
around.
Have a good one. See you.